If you've watched enough cartoons, you'll notice a pattern running through many of them. There's a good chance they'll have an episode where one of the characters gets sick or attacked from the inside, and one or more of the others will have to shrink in size, go inside them, and fight off the disease or threat. This is what is known as a Fantastic Voyage episode, named after and largely inspired by the 1960s sci-fi movie of the same name. This doesn't automatically make the episode good or bad, but it is interesting that it's been done in so many animated series over time, especially in the 90s and 2000s. So I thought, why not go through some of them? So I thought, why not go through 58 of them? I managed to find 58 different uses of this story in over 30 animated series. Buckle up, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. Here's 58 different Fantastic Voyage reviews. First, here are some broad stipulations. 1. The characters have to be reduced in size before entering the host. There are some stories out there where a large character isn't shown to change in size, but they still need a gag to work or something. But I'm a cartoon reviewer, not a vor fetishist. 2. There are many instances of a small character going inside another briefly, but I'm looking for full stories centered around the Fantastic Voyage trope. Meatball! 3. Robots and animals are allowed, but they have to be about as intelligent as a human, and humanoid in case of robots. And the small or shrunken character must be physical, no cyberspace episodes. 4th and final, there's a couple instances where an animated property will do the trope in a comic or video game, but I won't review those, they have to be animated for TV. As much as I want to bring up that Sonic the Hedgehog comic where he meets up with antibodies that are actually auntie-bodies, they've never done it in any of the cartoons. They'll use the name The Last Resort 3 times, but none of this sort of action. Something's fishy. Anyway, these rules aren't concrete. I'll break them once in a while if the episode still follows the basic formula accurately enough. But without further delay, let's go back to the beginning. You'd think the start of this trope can be traced back to the release of Fantastic Voyage in 1966, or maybe some obscure science fiction novella from the 30s, but nope. It's anime. The 1964 Astro Boy episode, The Bacteria Corpse, is the earliest recorded instance of a story about someone shrinking down and entering another being. But all I can find of it is the screenshot and the synopsis. I'm mostly looking at the Western side of animation, so I won't cover this even if I can get my hands on it, but it's still worth mentioning that the trope got its start in animated form. The film Fantastic Voyage entered production around the same time The Bacteria Corpse first aired in Japan, and was directed by Richard Fleischer, written by Harry Kleiner, and released on August 24th, 1966, eventually becoming a science fiction classic. The story is that a scientist, Dr. Jean Benz, is working with the United States and Soviet Union on shrinking technology and has come to a solution on how it can be maintained indefinitely. But when he makes it back to America, he's subject to an assassination attempt and knocked into a coma, with a blood clot in his brain for good measure. So the other scientists and a beehive at the Combined Miniature Deterrent Forces have to use a Navy submarine named Proteus to shrink down and go inside Benz's nerve system and fight the clot from the inside, as the size is too precise for surgery. However, they only have an hour before they revert to normal size and kill Benz. The select clips I've seen of it make it look like a pretty good film, good cinematography, serviceable acting, lovely sets and special effects for the time. It's very 60s in terms of aesthetic and color composition. A lot of these areas look more like psychedelic visions than actual anatomy, but it looks good and definitely has left a long legacy on pop culture. And so the very first Western Fantastic Voyage cartoon ended up being the Fantastic Voyage cartoon, which aired on ABC from 1968 to 1969. Ironically, only one of the 17 episodes bears resemblance to the movie. Episode 6, The Mind of the Master, showed me just how different the show was from its source material. The crew is entirely different, they travel in a vessel called the Voyager instead of Proteus, and their shrinking time limit has been raised to 12 hours. And this episode is about one of the shipmates, the Guru, being attacked on his way to a mission. The main guy is able to tell this Guru's in danger because of some kind of psychic bond, so they find him and go inside his head with the Voyager to wake him up, I guess. I'm not expecting the world from a Filmation cartoon, but none of this makes any sense. Is the psychic bond in any other episodes? Why is there a reason for doing a Fantastic Voyage in the official Fantastic Voyage cartoon so flimsy? Why is the evil wizard that attacked the Guru just taunting the CMDF crew on the ship? And why did he do it for 2 hours? The Guru's memories are presented as illusions that the others can see, so if that's the sort of show this is, I'm not expecting a hard explanation for everything, but a hard explanation for one thing, please. And why are some of the illusions hostile? Isn't the Guru their friend? Even though this is the first instance of a true cartoon Fantastic Voyage trope, it took a little longer to open the floodgates. There didn't seem to be any of this in the 1970s, and it only started to become a common occurrence in the 80s. Mighty Mouse, Muppet Babies, Danger Mouse, Fantastic Max, and Alvin and the Chipmunks all took a swing at going inside the body. I guess it became a more common trope in the 80s for 3 reasons. For one thing, Fantastic Voyage was 2 decades old now, and was becoming nostalgic for these cartoon writers. Other factors could have been the release of Inner Space, another sci-fi movie with a similar premise, and the advancement of technology becoming an easier thing for kids to grasp. We might not attain size-altering technology within this lifetime, or ever really, but it didn't stop us from wishing it was just a few years away. The first 80s one I want to delve into comes from early in the decade, Danger Mouse's Invasion of Colonel K, which was serialized across October 1982 as the 3rd series premiere. Here, the villain Baron Greenback and his assistant Stiletto attempt to shrink down and explore the brain of Danger Mouse's boss, Colonel K, and steal some vital memories and knowledge. As an extra measure, they control his voice box and make him fire Danger Mouse and his assistant Penfold, which is a plot point just here to bide time before Professor Squawk and Cluck gets to the bottom of this. This isn't the kind of show that can afford to spend time on heavy emotion, because they have to move at a brisk pace. Because of the way the show was serialized, I can't imagine how bothered kids watching were that Danger Mouse and Penfold don't get inside Colonel K until the 2nd part. And even there, it looks strange for an episode of this genre. Most of the Colonel's insides are metallic transportation tubes. I guess it was a budgetary constraint. Cosgrove Hall probably had some of these backgrounds from an older episode, and didn't have the resources to make entirely new ones that would more or less serve the same function, just red this time. If there's any reason to watch classic Danger Mouse in 2022, heck, if there's any reason to watch it in 1981, it wasn't for its mind-blowing animation. I was satisfied that this still carried the series' trademark cheeky British humour. I liked Colonel K's list of accomplishments.
First to climb Everest on a pogo stick, cerise belt with little gold applique butterflies all over it at judo, piano thrower extraordinaire.
Danger Mouse and Penfold running into a funny bone that won't stop clowning around, and the jokes about the 4th episode being interrupted by the narrator leading the cliffhanger in. It doesn't land as hard when you watch it all at once, but it's a strange obstacle all the same. Of what little I've seen of the original version of Danger Mouse, this isn't one of their better efforts, but it can still entertain. Now moving forward 6 years to the obscure Hanna-Barbera cartoon Fantastic Max. Fittingly enough, this show feels like a fever dream, and the name of this episode has me very worried. This is a show about a toddler who leads a double life of traveling through space with his toys. So what can they do to implement the Fantastic Voyage genre into this tightly knit world? Well, one day, Max and his toys, AB and FX, are visited by Agent Wally, only to be prohibited from traveling into space again. It appears as though Max tracked space dirt on Earth that contained the microscopic menace Naso Bathrobe. Oh no, not Naso Bathrobe, the most evil Fred Flintstone clone with 10 accents.
You're too late. My eggs are ready to hatch. That's my sneeze maker, Franz von Tickler. You'll never lay a hand on me.
His host turns out to be Max's older sister, Zoe, and that's an issue because she's meant to have a party today. So Max, AB, and FX shrink down and go inside her to fight off Naso, conveniently right as her fever symptoms wear off. This kid might just be the world's first female Fantastic Voyage host in fiction. What a trailblazer! Her primary character trait here is crushing over an older boy called Steve, but she's constantly held back by the weird stuff going on inside her. This is another one of those voyages where different parts of the body are personified by little creatures working jobs, like construction guys managing her food, a nightclub for her heart, and a German guy with a feather tickling her nose.
Yeah, it's good. Coochie, coochie, coo.
You know, the usual stuff you'd see in educational cartoons and whatnot. You know what I mean when I call this a fever dream show. If you're of a certain age, I can imagine seeing this nose-tickling German again triggered some incredibly early memory. or maybe Naso bathrobe hatching babies of himself. But even in this surreal setting, can I just criticize the writing on this show? For one thing,
Toon diapers!
That is one of the worst catchphrases I've ever heard in my life. And I don't know if FX is better in any other episodes, but here, he's just a convenience machine. He's there to make things happen and keep the plot going. He shrinks them down, he turns the pill into a spaceship, he gives Max a golf club and a plane. You should always hope that in a dire situation, that the hero can get out through their own skills or through the help of a friend. But this is taking the latter to a lazy degree. This show doesn't seem to be one of Hanna-Barbera's brightest moments. It's annoying and boring and not very creative. We've done one show from Filmation, one from Cosgrove Hall, and one from Hanna-Barbera. How about Alvin and the Chipmunks next, a Ruby Spears cartoon that was later produced by Deke. If I can punch off one more 80s animation studio, I win a free ride in Proteus, let's do this! Alvin's cleaning the house one day after an out-of-control game of wiffle ball, until the dog Lily distracts him and he spills a glass of juice. His owner Dave's angry about all this and forbids him from TV for a month unless he can clean everything up. Desperate, he happens upon Simon in the basement who's testing a new shrink ray he built, and they wait until they go upstairs, and Theodore teleports in from out of nowhere to sap in unintentionally. They shrink so small that they have no luck calling out for Dave, and I think someone had a lot of fun drawing this shot. They go on to Lily, who mistakes them for fleas, so Dave grooms the real flea out of her. The chipmunks then go inside Dave's ear. He still can't hear them, so why don't they go into his brain? Now that they're actually inside Dave, it's more of the same from Fantastic Max. Surreal environments, they affect what he does in the outside world, only they're much less abstract. There aren't any little creatures in Dave. The most surreal it gets is this screen of memories. Dave's at a function now and making a scene, but the chipmunks are able to save it by going into his nose, then his mouth, and singing their squeaky voices out. But even though Dave's aware of them, and they get out safely and grow back to normal size, none of it matters. It was all just a dream. Knowing how wacko Alvin and the Chipmunks can be, why didn't they feel comfortable making this particular episode canon? Is it that far-fetched for a show about child-sized chipmunk pop stars? Looking over at the world-renowned Monkipedia, this seems to be considered a rather mediocre episode by the bro-monk community. Maybe due to it coming from a later season, and those aren't as well regarded? Or just the dream ending and the writing being weird? I don't know, even the Fleischer, because I settled for the Italian dub.
Alvin, stai calpestando la corteccia che comanda I movimenti di Dave. Oh certo, sei banale. Come sempre la colpa è mia, vero?
Don't say I don't care about my Italian followers, and don't say I don't care about animation in the 1980s. I thought the Danger Mouse episode was okay, and can give the Fantastic Max and Alvin and the Chipmunks the benefit of the doubt. Let's move on in the evolution of animation to 1990, easily a more 80s year than any year in the actual 80s. Let's give this bygone era a farewell with Captain N the Game Master. I've always wanted him in Smash Bros. Unironically. As part of a story arc in Season 2, Kevin and Game Boy are investigating this mysterious rock they found in a previous episode. Simon Belmont comes around to play with it, and it ends up doing something wacky and covering Ken's face with these weird lines. They never appear again. But we do see what's happening inside Kevin's body. A tiny version of himself is being terrorized by a video virus that I guess came from The Rock? If you couldn't tell already, they were just writing whatever the heck they wanted as long as they got royalties from Nintendo. They are officially beating Mario to the punch by 19 years and using this plot, and they're doing it at 6 frames per second. The animation in Captain N is notoriously low quality, and it only seemed to get worse as the show went on. It feels like a slideshow at points. Nothing in Germ Wars is as bad as the time they forgot to put in backgrounds that one time, but the designs of these virus creatures are a sight to behold. So repulsive, even by virus standards. While Dr. Wright is monitoring Kevin, Princess Lana, Simon Belmont, Pit and Mega Man use one of Pit's shrinking arrows to fight the video virus from the inside. I don't care if they call him Kid Icarus, I'm calling him Pit. They go from the ear hole into the stomach. I don't know why I wanted this show to be scientifically accurate. Then, a little over halfway through the story, the writers remembered that they had to shell in NES games, so Duke and Game Boy go to a world in Videoland based on Faxanadu for a few minutes to find a cure, while the virus plot's still going on. What does Faxanadu have to do with Fantastic Voyage, besides starting with F? Some plot points and animations in here make no sense. Like, how come when Lana comes to rescue Kevin, he just breaks himself out? And how come they give up and get captured easily, then have no trouble fighting the enemies later on? When they get out, there's this password thing they have to get Kevin awake, which isn't explained well, but it turns out to be family. Because Kevin loves his Nintendo game characters more than he loved his real family at this point in the show. This might be the worst episode I've covered so far. It's a blatant advertisement and does a bad job of it too. The best thing I got out of it is that now I can say Alvin and Simon Belmont have done the same thing. Jumping back a few weeks to Tiny Toon Adventures, I must admit I have an embarrassingly small amount of experience with the 90s Steven Spielberg cartoons. What I have seen has all been great fun, and Inside Plucky Duck is no exception. The actual voyaging is only reserved for the framing device. Buster and Babs Bunny, no relation, have their opening routine intruded by Plucky Duck, who's always envious that he never gets to star. So they freeze time and show the audience what goes on inside his head that makes him such a crank. They head into a submarine with Calamity Coyote and investigate his inner space, filled with pride and jealousy.
Your ship isn't so great. I have one 10 times bigger, with a TV and a hot tub. Yeah.
The jokes are rather funny, but this is all just a framing device, clocking in at about 3 minutes in length, so I can't say much else about it. It's Tiny Toons. If you know what you're getting into, you're gonna like it. Moving on to Captain Planet, it's a no-brainer that a pro-environmentalism cartoon would explore pollution's effects on the human body some way, somehow, sometime. Season 2's An Inside Job begins with Dr. Blight's lackey, Sly Sludge, getting pushed by a congresswoman with an incredibly unfitting sound effect.
Now your illegal dumping days are over.
She's then shrunken by Dr. Blight so they can continue their pollution plot uninterrupted.
I gotta admit, Doc, that dimension distorter of yours sure reduces my legal problems.
Meanwhile, the Planeteers are setting up camp in the forest when Wheeler decides to get some drinking water from the stream, unaware that it's polluted. They then fight with Sly Sludge for a while, and Captain Planet helps them out. Blight figures out a convoluted way to get rid of most of the Planeteers. She lets Quam chase her for a while the others and Sludge get back in this planeteering submarine. Then she shrinks it and puts it in the polluted water, and Quam just comes in and drinks it. In his body, the rest of the Planeteers fight off these really cool looking parasites in the intestines, brain and liver, all while Quam feels the effects of the polluted water. Can you guess what the moral of the story is yet? If not, don't forget the 2 PSAs they have at the end.
So never dump your waste into lakes or rivers.
And if you have any doubts about drinking water, boil it first.
I don't mind this, it's an edutainment show after all, so I can understand why they're so specific with the organs and organisms, and are allowed to get grosser than in the 1980s. Some of these later Fantastic Voyage episodes are just gross for no solid reason. At least this one is educationally gross. I gotta say, even though I've hardly ever watched Captain Planet, these villains aren't half bad, though I wish the Tim Curry AI could do something other than crack jokes, and I felt like the Planeteers had really good chemistry with one another. You get the odd awkward exchange, but for an edutainment show, they don't skimp on the tainment part. I can't imagine this going insanely high if I chose to rank every Fantastic Voyage episode ever made. It does drag, but they have to fill 22 minutes with science facts, Marty's monkey noises, and get as much as they could out of the guest voices. This didn't convince me that Captain Planet was for me. I was born in a slightly different generation of global crises to learn about, but this is a good episode of the show. It was only a matter of time before the Nicktoons wet their whistle, with Rugrats being the first to embark on their own. In the episode Inside Story, the babies are enjoying some nice watermelon when Fanny tattles on them, and Grandpa comes over to warn them not to eat it, even imparting the old caution.
Wouldn't want to swallow a seed, would ya?
Chucky's very frightened that he's got a watermelon growing inside him, so Dr. Tommy does his duty. Meanwhile, Fanny happens upon the parents watching a Fantastic Voyage-style movie on TV, and figures out a new way to warp the baby's thin grasp on reality. They embark on a mission to shrink down and enter Chucky to retrieve the seed before it grows, but Fanny picks up on some bad habits on TV and decides to be the villain of the operation. If I can stop wasting my time on cartoons for 1 second, Dr. Michaels, I believe, is the character being parodied here. So they put Chucky to sleep with a cymbal monkey, and that's gonna remain the weirdest thing in this episode as they turn on the lamp and shrink themselves with its lazy beam.
Everyone stand under the lazy beam.
I have such a love-hate relationship with Rugrats speak. They enter Chucky through his very strong nostrils, memorize every voyage entrance that's going to be on the test, and almost drown immediately in his boogers. But a strong breath current takes them into the lungs, which look like a ball pit. Then they go to the bloodstream, which is more mechanical, but has the feel of a water ride. I really like how distinct every location is in this episode specifically. Given they're small children inside a small child, again, it reminds me of the Fantastic Max example. The big difference being, this is creative. I mean, Chucky's stomach is a lunchbox. That's a good way to get Reptar in there too. The climax is rather intense for a Rugrats episode, even an imagination one. Fanny waters the seed and the watermelon starts growing, putting them all in certain doom. But then Chucky wakes up and we learn that it was all a dream. And a very quick dream, since they haven't even turned the laser beam on yet. But he's coughed up the seed, so mission accomplished, I guess? Because this is all a 2-year-old's dream, I'd find it petty to pick apart the little plot holes in it. Like, how come the seed didn't grow from Chucky's saliva? That has water in it. But even if I were to argue, this is a very pretty episode. Rugrats may not have a conventionally pretty art style, but it sure is a colourful one. This was after they'd sorted the character animation out, but before that really distracting purple tint phase, so everything looks nice and sticks out. I almost forgot to mention Spike eats the seed, so it's got a here we go again ending. Not a bad one, but I've got a dog to explore later.
Seatbelts, everyone!
Now, no discussion of Fantastic Voyage episodes would be complete without bringing up the Magic School Bus. The famous multimedia edutainment series has gone inside the body in books and video games, plus no fewer than 7 episodes of the 90s animated series. To be moderate, I'll just do the 5 where they go inside human characters. They're probably the most famous episodes of the show, besides the pilot. Yeah! And you can see why with the first of them, the Magic School Bus for lunch. Arnold's going for a school record in gym chewing so his classmates can go on an awesome new amusement park ride, but he swallows the gum before he can break it. While he mopes about letting his class down, Miss Frizzle takes them on a trip in the Magic School Bus through Arnold's digestive system. As an adventure, it's good at connecting the outside world to the inside. Wanda gets stuck to the gum Arnold swallows, and that creates some tension, but she also enjoyed the ride for how exciting it was, like she would have enjoyed the amusement park ride. Sure thing, however you wish to get your kicks. On the educational side, they have some useful facts about digestion and go over most of the organs they needed to go through. Since this is a kids show, they only get to the large intestine. Everything after that is off limits.
I know. They are eliminated out through the anus, the end of the digestive system. But did you really expect us to show that on daytime TV?
Sometimes Dorothy Ann will give you a presentation on what they're learning. It's serviceable stuff. Outside, Arnold and Liz just spend time going through other records Arnold can break, but he can't break any of them. This is a fun way to fill the time and show that Arnold isn't dying. Oddly, there's a scene near the end where Wanda's communicating with Arnold as his conscience, trying to make him drink her seltzer and burp the bus out.
Hey, how come it's okay to drink Wanda's seltzer, but it's not okay to eat Ralphie's Mallow Blaster?
Because Wanda's a far kinder and more generous human being than Ralphie when it comes to sharing.
It's a funny scene and all, but how is he hearing the microphone? Did Miss Frizzle put a chip in his brain? Is that a requirement? But the question that I'm always wondering when I watch this show, what does Carlos have to say?
Now that's what I call a belly flop.
It sure is, Carlos. It sure is. How long until the next body-related trip? 1 week? I actually have a very faint memory of watching this episode, the Magic School Bus inside Ralphie, at a YMCA when I was really young. But I had to leave the room for a couple minutes because this was the first time I'd ever seen a Fantastic Voyage plot, and it was a bit intense for a 5-year-old. I'm a lot older now and a little bit wiser, so going back to this single episode of a single show feels like a chapter of my life has been completed. The story is about a story. Ralphie's in his room, racking his head to figure out a story for the schools.
Broadcast day, broadcast day, broadcast day, broadcast day, broadcast day.
However, his mother, played by Tim Daly, won't let him go because he has a fever and she's a doctor, so she takes illness seriously. Miss Frizzle doesn't. She takes the class to Ralphie's bedroom, seemingly without permission from Ralphie's mother.
Miss Frizzle, are you sure this visit isn't a field trip?
At first they try to do broadcast day in the room, but they soon decide that Ralphie can't do it sick, and they try taking the school bus inside of him. They run into a few problems with that, but at least they're educational problems. The throat's too sore to go through, so they go through a cut in his bloodstream, and then get attacked by the warring bacteria and white blood cells. Not that Miss Frizzle seems to mind.
But his white blood cells are doing such a good job. They now recognize us as enemies too.
It's also weird how Ralphie still watched the adventure on TV, and his mother comes in worried that he's not getting his rest and watches too, but never catches on that this is happening in his body. I couldn't believe that a doctor would be this naive, not even properly recognizing his friends, but maybe she was just humoring him. She doesn't force the lesson of the story, that Ralphie needs to rest while his blood fights the bacteria. It could have been laid out clearer, but it's nice that they teach a good lesson alongside the facts. But I guess it all comes down to what zinger Carlos has for us this time.
It's a shortcut. Get it? Shortcut? Carlos,
yuck!
And it's his best yet. Given how long Ren and Stimpy's been around at this point, it's about time they went on a Fantastic Voyage. There was The Boy Who Cried Rat in Season 1, where Stimpy's new owners force him to grind Ren with his teeth, but there's no size changing there, and there really isn't any serious exploration. It wouldn't be until Season 4 that they did one of these in Blazing Entrails. It starts with Stimpy waking up and acting much dumber than usual on his morning routine. I mean, look at how much he cuts himself up while trying to make Ren breakfast.
Breakfast is served.
There's only one person Ren can trust to help Stimpy out, and I'm thanking my lucky stars it's not one of those old farts they're forced to hang out with during the game seasons. No, it's this kid Dr. Brainchild, who diagnoses Stimpy with fatally low brain power, and says that Ren has to go inside Stimpy to save him. But instead of shrinking Ren, he grows Stimpy with an air pump. This has a lot of typical Ren and Stimpy lunacy. You have some muscular guys giving Ren some lays before he departs. They just have to make him enter through the butthole and ignite the flammable gas within. Then he has a very tense time on the digestive subway system. The only one of these bits I remember since watching through the series for my 3-year-old review is Ren meeting an antibody in the stomach, then dropping the mission to raise a family of antibodies inside Stimpy for a year. That isn't to say it's an inherently forgettable episode. Dr. Brainchild has a really cool design that reminds me of the Gross Out and Activity books, and should have become a recurring character. Though Stimpy's already a part-time scientist, but he still could have functioned as a second opinion. The plot of the episode isn't perfect though. You're telling me Brainchild spent an entire year waiting for Ren to finish the job and didn't once just go into Stimpy's gaping nostril here? It's not where Ren is supposed to go anyway, that's the ear, and I know really long time skips are a running gag on this show.
You've been out here for months!
But it's still a bucket full of oddities that pile on you at once. I will say this is delightfully gross for a Ren and Stimpy Fantastic Voyage episode, and though glitched, I like this animation of the ignorant gland beating Ren's brains out. It's no masterpiece, but it's a diamond in the rough for Season 4. It's kind of wild to think that by the mid-90s, Nickelodeon had already done 2 of these, but Disney Television Animation had yet to do anything beyond normal shrinking episodes. Only one of their shows was able to break the mold in 1996, and guess what that was? I always go into Quack Pack with low expectations, and unfortunately, they don't usually rise any higher. The Germinator starts with Daisy Duck taking Donald to a checkup, and by the way he's acting, you'd think he's having a prostate exam, but no, standard checkup it seems. The doctor's assistant, Dr. Tovar, however, has a screw loose. Look Tovar, it's you! He's so obsessed with germs that he does this.
I'm shaking! I am at one with the germs!
Like, damn man, I like atoms, but I'm not gonna shrink just so I can see them. He gets inside Donald because he could obviously make it all the way to his boss's office. We then cut back to Huey, Dewey, and Louie committing domestic terrorism. Then Donald comes home with the expression of the average Quack Pack viewer. Sorry if this is way more sarcastic than my other reviews, but with a show like Quack Pack that's so dated stylistically and comedically, you need to make up your own fun. The triplets and Daisy soon notice that Donald's acting differently. He's slowly transforming into a duck version of Tovar, as he's taking over the duck's brain and planting germs in it. They all go to the doctor's office. Tova almost shrinks them, but Huey later gets all the triplets shrunk anyway, so great cliffhanger. So glad Daisy didn't shrink, that would have been catastrophic. She tricks Tova into drinking the boys by flirting with him over germs.
I mean, who can resist germs? They're so tiny and cute and germy. Sometimes I don't wash my hands for fear of hurting the little guys.
I'll give that a pass, it's so weird it's funny. They go inside Donald's stomach, then into this weird Wonderland place with a heart that's a nightclub for blood cells and antibodies. They totally ripped off Fantastic Max. I'll give them this one too. I like this joke they do with the elevator.
Looks like it goes to the brain.
But that's it. 3 worlds, with 2 of them explored for around a minute. I don't care how much monotone sass they wanted to squeeze out of these ducks. I know they could have been more creative. I mean, these germling designs aren't the worst I've seen. Oh yeah, Tova's plan is to get Donald sick, then make him sneeze at a stadium, which Daisy manages to prevent. Again, this is at least a fine story. And the way they get out, I'll admit, is also funny.
And with that, old Rover laid down his flea-bitten head and went to that big fire hydrant in the sky.
I tried my hardest to have fun with this one, and I did get some fun bits here or there. It just plays host to a lot of Quack Pack's flaws, namely that the main trio and villains aren't interesting enough to carry a half hour. I like Donald and Daisy as this Gen X aunt and uncle duo, but that's pretty much it. It might sound strange, but I've always had Quack Pack on my agenda. My roulette wheel just hates its guts. Oh, you better believe Timon and Pumbaa went there. Compared to other Disney movies turned TV shows, this one seems to be one of the more faithful to the spirit of its source material. I mean, Timon and Pumbaa aren't easy characters to mess up, as this episode shows. They're in Romania now, and find a folk woman telling fortunes and spiritual messages. I'd struggle to call this timely, and even harder to call this timeless, but we see how Timon would deal with getting a curse from a bug after trying to eat it. Pretty well, but Pumbaa doesn't share his apathy. This surely isn't the masterclass writing presented in the original Lion King, but again, they're faithful enough to the characters for me to see why this show was so popular. Timon wakes up the next day, having turned into the very thing he devours. Pumbaa doesn't realize it's his buddy and eats him, so Timon has to navigate the body of a warthog, which could you guess is more surreal than usual?
All items which have been eaten must follow the yellow line, right?
It's surprising to me how many of these episodes chose to anthropomorphize the body rather than be a realistic look through the insides. This one kinda has its cake and eats it too. The stomach looks normal for a whale's stomach, but I guess that's the joke. But then all the other systems are much wackier. The jokes are all fine, but one bothers me more than the others. When Timon gets to the brain, he finds out that Pumbaa's brain is the size of a pea. Not only did Disney make the same joke twice in 1 week, but when Timon plugs it in, Pumbaa's intelligence increases to genius levels.
My word, I do believe I've eaten my good friend Timon.
I like where this is going, comedy-wise, but the ending's kind of a non-ending. Timon decides to unplug the brain before leaving out the burp hole, but Pumbaa's too dumb to remember that his bug is his friend and eats him again. That's what Timon gets for handicapping his friend like that, but the second half of this thing might as well be an endless loop. Beetle Romania has a couple good ideas, but this story could have been a bit better written and have a more conclusive end. The big draw for this show is of course Timon and Pumbaa, and I saw no problem in how they were characterized, so at least they got that right. Hey cool, it's the Magic School Bus again. What have they got to teach me now? I'm not being ironic, I actually am starting to like these characters and what they do. And then I met Janet.
Say hello to your competition, the original phys ed teacher extraordinaire.
Now, this episode's story is a bit different from the last. Miss Frizzle is taking part in this teacher's athletics function, with the rival school teacher, Mr. Sinu, being her only competitor. During one of the events, Ralphie makes a big mistake by telling Miss Frizzle to hold her breath, so she doesn't have enough energy to finish it first. Before the next event, she quickly takes the class into the bus to give them a lecture on the muscles and circulatory system, then pulls the rug out from under them by getting Liz to shrink most of them inside the bus, then she snorts it to give them a closer look. I like how deceptive she was about it. She's teasing them with normal school lessons, then makes them go on an adventure until they learn. She doesn't even know if her methods are going to be successful. To be fair, they don't get embroiled in any mortal danger this time. The most trouble they get into is with the ventricles. Then when she goes faint after the cycling event, at least they get to learn what happens to oxygen in the body and what happens when muscles get overworked. The best thing about this episode is how dumb as a brick they made Ralphie.
You mean when you followed my blood cells all around my body? What's that got to do with air?
He's so clueless as to how the circulatory system works, and his voice actor, Stuart Stone, forces his deliveries more and more over the course of the episode. I'm not putting him down, like how dare a 10-year-old not know how the lungs work, but it just added some entertainment value for me personally. It gets more teenage and Canadian by the minute. They also managed to save Miss Frizzle by giving her more oxygen from the air in the bus's tires. I really hope those are magic tires, because I'd hate for her to get some sort of rubber poisoning. This is one for the books. There's a lot about the magic school bus works out that makes you think twice, but it's little harmless things. Take us home, Carlos.
Watch! When the air hits the purple blood cells, they suck it up and they turn bright red.
Oh, you're a card. Time to start exploring the world of boy genius Fantastic Voyages, which go together like bread and butter, and see how Cartoon Network does it with Dexter's Laboratory. There was a little Fantastic Voyage inspired bumper used for the first season, but the example I'm digging into today is Season 2's Fantastic Voyage. Dee Dee's family is horrified to see her sick, with Dexter diagnosing her with the dreaded common cold, before getting an idea of how to cure her in a way that could cure it and land himself fame and fortune. Dexter's so eager to do the mission that Dexter's gonna do it anyway. I love this sequence of him preparing the shrink ray, vessel, and launch sequence. This is what Dexter's Lab is all about to me, bold colors and directing, with some humor on the side. Unfortunately for Dexter, during the launch sequence, his target is intruded by the family's dog that they have just for this one episode, and he unknowingly journeys through the dog, believing Dee Dee has some sort of canine virus. The rest of this is mostly gags of how Dexter's affecting the behavior of the dog.
Whoa, hon, check out the light show.
Culminating in him battling the dog virus by changing its DNA into that of a stock image of a puppy that makes the dog more well behaved. And who else is celebrated for this discovery than this droopy vet?
Allow me to present my new discovery to the world. The first case of a human virus infecting a canine friend.
It's held back a bit by the format. Dexter's Lab episodes are usually only 7 minutes long, and an adventure like this is shown to deserve a much longer runtime. However, the great animation and jokes on display are what make this one of the highlights of this voyage through the history of this trope currently. It's classic Dexter's Lab shenanigans in a genre that fits the show perfectly. It would be hard to mess up. I am very worried about the state of that drunken elephant, but that's my one and only gripe. One more season of the Magic School Bus to go, and their penultimate journey into the body is their weakest up to this point, I have to say. The story is that Arnold's being recognized for this prestigious award around rocks, and I guess he's so anxious about this that he spent days on end eating nothing but seaweedies, these weird seaweed carrot snacks, which has given his skin an orange pigment. Maybe it's because I've only watched a VHS worth of Magic School Bus content, but I felt like I was thrown into the story pretty hard. I know nothing of Arnold's genius rock knowledge or these seaweedies. And if for some reason this was the first episode you had to watch for a science class, this stuff would be confusing you too. Arnold questions why his skin's gotten so orange. When you know he's been eating only junk food, it should be easy to connect some dots. So Miss Frizzle takes most of the students on a field trip into Arnold and Phoebe's foreheads to learn about their skin.
Arnold, we are being frizzled big time.
They have their own slang term for it now, good lord. So Arnold and Phoebe's classmates crawl around in their foreheads. This is sounding like the weirdest episode of Hey Arnold ever right now, but it's really a journey into the nature of skin cells and how they form. As Wanda and Frizzle observe from the top of Phoebe's head, they aren't getting any answers this way, but at least they spent the entire second act learning only one thing that's going to help them for the third. The bus hitches a ride on a seaweedy and goes back inside Arnold's digestive system. I wouldn't argue they're repeating themselves because, to be fair, this last act does improve on things. There's more information delivered about what villi do and how food is transferred to skin cells, and how eating food with colored dye in it can make your skin a different color. This is all intercut with Arnold trying to hide from his award, embarrassed by the color of his skin, that came out wrong, embarrassed by his weird condition, and blaming Janet on it.
Everyone will laugh. I'll get Janet for this.
But the school bus is able to absorb all the dye in time. All of it from through his whole body. It feels like such a quick fix. I don't really like this episode. It's not harmful or anything, but the plot's too jumpy and the educational value is more muted. At least we're in a new golden age of Carlos.
Aren't you glad you're not orange anymore? Carlos!
He should do stand-up. Or his own opening scene. The magic school bus makes a stink is all about smells and how the nose picks them up. And our first big set piece is this smell competition, where a lady is judging smells that students from all over the country are nominating to be the new big smell. Look, this world's already weirded me out enough. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But unfortunately, Carlos's mothball can't enter because it gets squashed, which Janet takes a lot of delight in. What an annoying kid. I hope it's telegraphed well that she's an antagonist and that she gets defeated as to deflate said antagonism. Well, I'll be. Frizzle's class retreats back to home base, where Frizz and Liz show off Plan B. They've put all the other students' nominees together and have started an experiment to combine them to make the strongest odor possible. That is how smell works, so I can't really complain. But why don't we learn a bit closer? Closer than those awesome molecule goggles can present at least. They get their chance when Janet comes around to sabotage their project with skunk spray, so Frizz takes them on a field trip into her nose. 9 minutes into the episode. This episode just barely counted because of how brief the voyage is compared to everything else I've covered so far. That isn't to say it's better or worse than the others, just that I got a sense of false advertising. The episode's alright though, nothing really wrong with it. On its own, the nose stuff is just rank.
Is that stuff what I think it is? It's not. It's not what? Not what, Arnold? Snot! Carlos!
That's one of Carlos's best. But the part where Janet sneezes them out, I've never been that repulsed by mucus, but even I felt uneasy. They learn about smell on a molecular level, then tease Janet with the knowledge they've gained, but not before staying small and shooting all the skunk spray molecules while the judge is sniffing. Ralphie and Wanda's gaming skills are exemplary, and they manage to eradicate all of them and win their class first prize, for a contest that just weirds me out. And that is the last Fantastic Voyage field trip of the classic run. It was very bumpy, but I learnt enough about the body again to win a trivia tournament. And I can see why this show was so popular and well received. You'd think I'm now done with cartoons that ran from 1994 to 1997, and you'd be mistaken. Our Real Monsters is definitely the 90s Nicktoon I've had the least interest in. Not my least favorite, but it's just never appealed to me in any way. That doesn't mean I think it's bad, but with an episode like this, that notion is hard to sell. Internal Affairs starts with the gang, Ickis, Oblina, and Crumb, digging around the garbage site for lunch, unaware that a parasite is eyeing Crumb as his next host. He winds up in Oblina instead, and we see what his deal is. He pulls a lever in her stomach that makes her intensely hungry, to the point she can eat anything and everything. If the parasite isn't released soon, she could explode, so Ickis and Crumb are forced to shrink down and venture inside her. They do this by using a recycled treadmill, which is something I'm sure this show does a lot. They reuse garbage in creative ways. There's at least one positive message, and this right here is more of the sort of art I was expecting to see all throughout the 90s, very bodily and graphic. That's my favorite thing about the episode. It matches that dark, grimy aesthetic the show is known for, and is also allowed to be more colourful in the process. The monster puns are also entertaining, if you're 8.
Where do you think we are?
I think it's your scaratory gland.
But if you were that young while watching this, I bet you were hiding behind the couch. Because this is as icky as the 90s get, particularly in children's media.
There is an easy way to fix this. I will simply pull my guts out of my mouth and voila! Voila!
When Ickis and Crumb finally make it to the parasite, it's made a palace for himself in Oblina's stomach with a picture of Elvis tying everything together. The Elvis picture I get, but I don't know if the palace influence matches the parasite's schlubby personality. It's destroyed rather quickly when Ickis starts pulling at Oblina's cords, and one of them makes her puke everything out, and I thought Janet's mucus was as gross as it would get. The parasite is rightfully punished by being forced to dance like a ballerina, and I get a small taste of the main student's friendship that I think would get me into the show if this episode had more of it. I like the animation here, and the story is gross enough for what they wanted to do, but it's lacking the comedy and chemistry that I think would bring more balance to the picture. This next example of the plot is very interesting. Brainwashed from Pinky and the Brain. It's interesting in that they do it twice across the story, and that it's a three-parter, and that the voyages aren't the focus of the story. Still, they're plot relevant, and this is a show that doesn't deserve to miss out. First, I'll talk about everything but the voyaging. There's a new dance craze sweeping the nation, the Schmerzkahoven, that's actually designed to reduce the dancers' brain size until they're dumb enough to enjoy Pauly Shore movies. I didn't know human intelligence could get that low, but this is a cartoon. Pinky and the Brain try getting to the bottom of this and go on all sorts of wacky adventures. They're captured, get their memories wiped, and are sent off to this prisoner village obsessed with hats. Try to search the Schmerzkahoven creator up online, but the info is so confidential that it makes Acme Lab explode. Then we meet up with Brain's rival Snowball, who's been imprisoned in his own company. They then fly a jet to a private island where they're all spliced to find out it was the creator's cat Precious behind the whole plot. This is the most intense episode of Pork Pie and the Fez I've ever seen.
They're pork pie and the fez.
So, where does Fantastic Voyage fit into all this? Well, it bookends the saga. It all begins with Brain and Pinky already on a journey through voiceover artist Tom Bodett,
pitchman for a popular chain of motels, as well as the voice artist for those tedious good idea, bad idea segments.
Hey, I liked those. How dare this show be humble? So they're journeying through him in order to take over the world, but the plan is put on hold by the Schmerzkahoven and never really revisited. Later on, Brain hatches the shrinking submarine plan again in order to prevent Precious from turning the human race into her cat slave with the final song lyrics, but instead going inside one of the singers for Bab. I prefer Baba. They go inside this hickish dolt, Bobby Bob, instead, but still make do on their plan. This saga was a whole lot to throw onto a Pinky and the Pie newbie, but I still enjoyed it quite a lot. The plot is very convoluted, and there are certain plot points that they really needed to flesh out more, but the jokes and chemistry between the maid duo are what carry everything. The story is unbelievably dated though. I mean, they're parodying the Macarena, throwing shade at Pauly Shore movies, Bill Clinton's gradually getting stupider. I truly feel like I'm in the 90s. And while it's cool that they snuck Fantastic Voyage into all the different movie tropes they wanted to parody, it's sort of showing how stock it's become over time. You know it's getting oversaturated when even Doug does it. One of the many Quailman episodes in the Disney run did a voyage, but you have to sit through a lot of normal Disney Doug to get to it. Doug and Skeeter are playing football when Roger intercepts and grabs it and throws it to Boomer, only to end up hitting Mr. Bone. He blames Doug for it. Doug takes it like a bitch. The next day, they get into a fight in the school hallway, and Roger fakes a foot injury in front of Mr. Bone just to make Doug look worse. As if the world needed more Mr. Bone. Feeling guilty for getting bullied and blamed, Doug decides to help Roger out at his house, but ends up being a total doormat who does all his chores and picks all his stuff up. So far, this is totally aggravating. There's already been a ton of episodes about Doug standing up to Roger, and their approach to it here lacks a sensical motivation. The only thing in this opening that kind of entertained me was this alarm Doug wears on his head.
Oh, this? Roger bought it for me from the Sharper Schlemmer catalog. It's kind of a beeper.
It reminds me of something Mr. Dink would invent, but the crisis is bad enough for Doug to slip into one of his Quailman fantasies, where he stops Dr. Klotzenstein from turning the people of the city into rodeo clowns. However, his quail stare is so strong that it puts Klotzenstein into a coma he can't recover from. Feeling guilty, Quailman gets the Silver Skeeter to order him a miniature submarine from a comic book so they and Quail Dog can go inside him and save his life. It isn't made clear if Quailman's the cause of the sci-fi gibberish that the doctor and nurse are fretting about.
The parallel flexibility of his transitional pump response mobility is phlegmatic and falling.
Yes, I can see that, nurse.
But Klotzenstein's germs fight back with guilt. And I mean these missiles that turn into pointing hands that make their victims feel bad.
Shame on you! When was the last time you changed your power briefs?
All of the heroes are victimized one by one, but it doesn't matter, as Quailman's able to free Klotzenstein's good intention from the spleen-like organ, saving the day. The ideas and scenery are cool, I guess, but it's not very funny and is a mouthful to follow. It makes the overall episode a bit better, but not enough to save this from being one of the worst Fantastic Voyage cartoons of the 90s. Now would be a good time to take a detour into what could have been a whole Nicktoon about going through the body. Microcops was one of the many shorts showcased in the anthology series Oh Yeah Cartoons, and while it is unlikely it would have ever become a full series, it's a pretty good short on its own. There's this cartoon man whose brain is filled with microcops, a police force that aims to keep the human body clean from anything deemed a threat. The run to the litter, a microcop named Jones, is sent into the dreaded Sector S while the big guys battle the virus. But Jones turns out to be the one who has to deal with the virus and its many tricks. The story and writing aren't that deep, it's a simple underdog story, just set inside a random man. The real draws are the gags, of which there aren't many super standout ones. The guy gets a heart attack that isn't treated as being serious, and the animation. For 1998, this is a looker. I really like the character designs and abstract background styles. I always find it really fun to check out random forgotten animations, like many of the Oh Yeah cartoons that are deemed failures, just because they didn't get miniseries or full shows. That's one reason I wanted to watch it, beyond it not technically being a Fantastic Voyage episode. John Eng seems to be doing well, so I hope whatever experience he has now could have come from here.
Oh yeah, cartoons!
Cow and Chicken might have done an episode about Chicken traveling through Cow, but their spin-off I Am Weasel one-upped them by throwing a shrink ray into the mix. The Incredible Shrinking Weasel is an unbelievably weird episode of American television. Like, you all think Japanese TV is weird? Have you ever stopped to think about how weird this makes your country look to Japanese viewers? Weasel and Baboon are a doctor and nurse today, and they're performing microsurgery to a crowd of doctors, striving to fix a crack in Red Guy's buttocks. Baboon was in charge of the shrink ray, so obviously it doesn't go well. When they get inside, I have two problems with the plot. For one thing, they're always floating for no reason. You'd think it's because they're swimming in blood and fluids, but they're the size of blood cells. And what a great surgery performance. No one can see what they're doing. The jokes are rather immature across the board. The funny thing about the security guard and white blood cells isn't that they're anthropomorphized, it's that they have butt cheeks. They then get into a scuffle with a truck driver germ with a German accent. What a weird pun.
Oh, this whole thing. I got it at last year's germ convention. Aha!
It's the best thought out joke of the episode, but still. Weasel's just about able to fix Red Guy's butt crack by putting a plaster on it, but he and Baboon start growing. They almost make it out, but get stuck in the mouth, and the next place we see them is in Red Guy's cranium. I can tell just from the absurdity of everything that this is probably one of the better episodes of I Am Weasel, but it doesn't seem like they have a very high bar, do they? I just see a bunch of butt jokes and puns that don't go anywhere super funny. It's not as bad on your second go around because you can prepare for the senseless wackiness by then, but still far from a good episode. Now moving out of the 90s into the 2000s, a veritable paradise for this genre, we get to the Angry Beavers episode Fantastic Voyage. Technically, although it was produced in 2000, it didn't air in the US until 2006. But just give me this one, nothing else happened with animation in 2000. On TV. This is an episode about the scientists invading the beavers' land once more, and they bait Daggett with a Pokemon card. That wasn't needed, because Dag distracts himself with his precious nose-picking time anyway. They dart him and take him to this large platform near the dam where they enlarge him to a gigantic size. This seems to be a trend in Nicktoons. The host is enlarged instead of the Voyagers being shrunk. Norby's watching a live cooking show about the wrestling character when he hears Dag's loud and deepened voice and discovers he's become all... Yeah, that. And he talks like Rain Man sometimes. That's great. The scientists head through his digestive system, literally invading his personal space in the pursuit of science. Norbert will have none of that, and gets out that motorcycle on a rocket we all know he has by this point, and shoots himself up his brother's nose, while an 80s rock anthem rendition of the Angry Beavers theme plays. This is what I love about this show, it all feels like they're just having fun with it, no need to take the story too seriously. Norb chases the scientists around Dag for a bit, but then they make it to the brain area and truly have it their way. They take control of Daggett and are almost able to get him to crush Norbert, but their time runs out as Dag reverts back to normal size. Don't worry, his insides are practically rubber. Overall, this is a really good one. While a bit more referential and tonally discordant than I'm used to, the jokes are solid overall. That being said, if the Angry Beavers isn't your thing, this won't change your mind. The animation's pretty good though, nice detail on the insides, for the kind of story they're making of course. Now, 2001 might just be the year of the Fantastic Voyage episode. 4 of the most popular cartoons at the time each took on the parody, not to mention it was the year Osmosis Jones was released, which took place inside the human body. I won't cover it for this marathon, but I will look at a few episodes of its spin-off series, Ozzy and Drix. But for now, Futurama, Parasites Lost. Absolute gem for something that starts with an egg salad sandwich at a petrol station. While the Planet Express crew is filling the ship up with dark matter, Leela gets ogled by some truckers, and Fry makes a fool of himself trying to fend them off. Later on, when Fry gets into a little accident with the building's steam generator, his body repairs itself much faster than humanly possible. After some testing, the crew finds out his bowels have been invaded by parasitic worms from the sandwich he ate, and who knows what they can do to him. Before the voyage even begins, I like how they've set up 2 bad things that change once it starts, being how Fry can't articulate his appreciation for Leela, and the generalization that worms are a bad thing that must be destroyed with harpoons. Instead of shrinking the crew, Farnsworth just makes tiny robotic duplicates of them, because shrinking technology is too hard, but Leela stays in the normal-sized world to put them in Fry's ear and distract him so he doesn't find out. Ergo, his insides won't defend themselves against the ship. What follows is the stuff I remember the most about the episode, the great jokes about each of the organs they go through.
Be very quiet. We're in the ear.
Okay, Professor.
What?
And the worms slowly making Fry smarter, stronger, and more romantic towards Leela. He even gets back at the truckers properly and confesses his feelings. Figuring that she likes Fry better this way, Leela manages to clone and shoot herself into Fry at the last minute of the other's mission and sabotage it. While this is a very rash action on her part, and why aren't they using the harpoons? This is the first time she's had romantic feelings for Fry, and as they point out later on, love makes us do stupid things. After finding out about the worms, Fry's at first happy that Leela likes him more, and even manages to perform some holophone music for her. Write that down, students, they bring it back in the first finale, but then we get this bombshell.
I love what you've become.
What I've become.
Perfect scene. Being smarter and more rational now, Fry knows what he must do. Go up his own butt and scare off the worms, even if it means cutting up his nerves and losing his newfound strength in the process. They go away without much of a fight, and it's weird that there's still some tiny, immobile Fry and Leela clones in his body after this, but this was overall a very good piece of drama disguised as comedy, and that's what Futurama accomplishes at its best. This is one of the most impactful episodes of the series, and will no doubt end up a high point of this marathon. Over on Nickelodeon, 2 of their newest Nicktoons went off on Fantastic Voyage episodes on the exact same day, April 13th, 2001. The first of these was the Fairly OddParents in Tiny Timmy. Here, Timmy has to write a report on microbiology for school, but doesn't find the subject interesting in the slightest. Wishing there was a way to make it more fun, Cosmo and Wanda zap him up a shrinking suit. That way he can get up close and personal, and he can control an awesome mech.
Cool, I'm tiny, I'm bored already.
Solid premise, solid characterization, damn good title card and music. It's already a tight package. Vicky's babysitting because Filthy and Barnaby are out spreading new fashion trends, and warn her not to knock over this vase. Uh-oh, she knocks it over, and decides to blame Timmy and call over a party crew to add insult to injury. This is all while Cosmo and Wanda and Timmy travel through her body, discovering all the weird going-ons within, notably that she has a whole theme park for a kidney. I like the pun, but it is kind of weird for weirdness sake, and it's good that Timmy's adventure to find them is more structured. He goes to the brain where Vicky's controlled by men and computers,
Kindness?
Never showed up for work.
And fills in for kindness to fix everything going on outside, cranking it up so hard that he turns Vicky into Snow White. As funny as it is seeing mishaps begin in the Fairly OddParents, it's a good sign when the resolutions are just as funny, as is the case with the vase.
We're rich!
What?
Vicky, that vase was worth and insured for $50,000. We only bought it for $1.
Some of the storytelling is a bit weird here, like why didn't Filthy and Barnaby destroy this vase as soon as they got it if it's worth that much? To make a joke work. How come Timmy goes down to the size of a protozoa, then macroscopic, and then bring up the catch that the shrink suit can only shrink to make a joke work? You can nitpick the hell out of this story, but the core of it, that Timmy has to learn about the human body, but gets the wrong idea of everything because it's a cartoon, is an entertaining premise that they run with. Timmy's my favorite thing about this episode. He gives one of my favorite lines here.
Well, my name's Timmy. I have a short attention span, and...
Keep in mind, this is only the 6th episode out of all 132 they ever made in the entire lifespan of the Fairly OddParents, so it's not quite a perfect showcase of their skills and humor, but the presentation is already pretty nice, the visuals are another great thing about it, and I should reiterate that the soundtrack is fantastically eerie, early and weird in all the right ways. It almost feels like Invader ZIM music. Hey, speaking of, one of the darkest and most striking Nicktoons of all time, which is something I can respect. They made an equally dark and striking Voyage episode, which is something I can respect. Gurr comes home from getting a milkshake one gothic night, but forgets to close the door and window. While Zim's warning him how this can be dangerous to their mission, Dib sneaks in and takes pictures of him to prove he's an alien. I have to say it, I may not be Invader Zim's target audience, but I really can appreciate the atmosphere and directing here. Nothing really exciting has happened yet, but they've hooked me. The next day, there's a scene in the kitchen where Dib tells his sister Gaz about the alien show he's going to mail his evidence to, and we learn that Gaz likes video games. At first, that's the whole scene, but then later that night, we learn that while he was eating peas for lunch, Dib unknowingly ingested Zim in a microscopic battleship, aiming to erase Dib's knowledge of the evidence and make him stupid altogether.
As an added bonus, I might as well make your entire brain not smart no more.
I feel like they could have relayed that information somehow earlier on, but still, this reveal's pretty good. On top of that, the CGI in Dib's disgusting body is some of the most impressive animation so far. Not one to let Zim win, Dib borrows a microscopic battleship from his dad and fights for his insides from the inside. He slowly loses the battle, but Gaz is there to pester him about what type of game he's playing, and is eager to play it.
When we die, can I play?
Now, this battle drags on for a pretty long time, but I can understand that they wanted to get their money's worth out of the computer animation. It was a big deal at the time, and one of the big contributors to whether or not the show would succeed. It certainly succeeded in cultivating a following, and it's pretty clear why. NanoZim is a good example of how distinct and epic Invader ZIM was for its time, and how it made the rest of animation look around it. Case in point, I want to make it clear that I don't hate Family Guy, but even back in the early seasons when they were making more solid episodes, they were always sending you mixed signals on how to feel about the stories and characters. The story here is all over the place. It starts with Peter and Lois visiting Lois's sister Carol, and taking her to the hospital when she gets into labor.
Push! Push!
I am! It won't go back in!
And her baby boy is so cute that they decide to have another child, which everyone in the Griffin household is on board with. Everyone but Stewie, who doesn't want Family Guy to jump the shark like the Brady Bunch did. He's waiting till they get to season 7. His methods in preventing Peter and Lois from having a new baby are all fun bits that gradually get more cartoony, culminating in the reason we're all here. Stewie's last resort is to shrink himself in a battleship and shoot up all the sperm in Peter's reproductive system. It's pretty much Star Wars now, with the score, sound effects, and action all paying lovely tribute to it inside a fat man's scrotum. Everything Seth MacFarlane loves doing on Family Guy is here and accounted for. Star Wars jokes, show tunes, wanting to be anything but a family sitcom. The big highlight of this episode is the battle between Stewie and his potential younger brother, Bertram, voiced by Wallace Shawn. The action's fun, the performances are good, and it doesn't stop being funny. They even try to add some tension and drama, with Stewie coming to like the idea of having a baby brother, only now it's too late. They're able to get Stewie to escape by opening up Peter's tear ducts. Their method? Sing an old 80s song I don't care about. And while there's still a threat posed with Peter relieving himself, it's clear that Bertram is still alive in his own unborn way, and will continue to interact with Stewie in different ways as the show goes on. I really like the second half of the episode, with all the computer animation and action, but it feels a bit too brisk. The first half really wants to sell how Family Guy can make this sort of stock sitcom plot more raunchy, And to be fair, this was the right time to exploit the idea. Early season 3, this was when they were starting to push the envelope much further. Quagmire's getting more sleazy, Stewie's the recipient of more gay jokes.
Wow, the evidence is really piling up.
Make any joke you want, you know I look good.
The stuff you're going to remember the most about a given Family Guy episode is probably the cutaways and one-off gags. Like, remember the time Peter had a pet rock? Thankfully, Mission Impossible is able to stand out and be genuinely entertaining more often than not. And thus we move on to Ozzy and Drix, the closest thing to a full-on Fantastic Voyage cartoon, and that includes the actual Fantastic Voyage cartoon. I'll just cover the premieres for each of the 2 seasons, since they're episodes about Osmosis Jones going into other bodies. They start off in Frank from the movie, who's gotten even worse than before, so now I don't feel the need to watch the movie. They drive home that Frank's a lost cause and his body's falling to pieces, but Jones still wants to protect it from the scarlet fever virus. Unfortunately for them, right as Jones has got it, a mosquito sucks him, Drix, and the virus out of Frank, and into a 13-year-old boy called Hector. You'll be happy to know that the city of Hector is still animated and designed really well, and that it's home to less of those awesome gross-out jokes, but they'll still sometimes throw in the movie quality sequences, which look a bit jarring. There are things I like about this episode as a pilot, like how it introduces the new mayor Jones and Drix have to comfort, who's the same age as Hector, the whole thing with Jones coming to terms with this being his new home, and looking on the bright side.
You know, he looks a lot like Frank when Frank was that age.
What happened?
Fast food, late nights, smoking. It all started going downhill around this age.
It occurs to me, Ozzy, considering our situation and all, that perhaps we might be more useful in Hector.
There's certainly a positive message in here for the show's target audience of tweens to take care of your body now before it's too late. Too bad it craps all over a movie they'd like. Chris Rock and David Hyde Pierce didn't reprise their roles, but Phil Lamar and Jeff Bennett make for good replacements. They're able to deliver what people like about these characters. The action's also pretty fun for TV animation. The Scarlet Fever virus is played by Tim Curry to give it that extra bit of menace.
Just the place for a big bugging bacterium like me to have a fresh start.
Its design is great too, and its demise perfectly grisly. From what I've heard, the city scenes were the best parts of Osmosis Jones, and the human world stuff blew, and that seems to ring true for the TV show. Hector isn't an interesting lad, but this is the first episode, I'll see where it goes. The Season 2 premiere, an out-of-body experience, gives me a good idea of how the show and characters changed across the first. The mayor really hates Jones for some reason, and I think one of those is that he's gotten more smug and loudmouthed over time. He's still a fun character, but episodes like this really test him. While fighting off bacteria in Hector's windpipe while he's drowning in a pool, they get caught in a flood, and Jones is transferred into Hector's crush, Christine, when she performs CPR on him. But the thing is, Christine's a girl, so on top of getting thrown into adventure in a brighter, girlier body city, Jones starts acting more feminine.
Not to mention clean. And it has the most darling shops. Did I just say darling?
There's a danger pose with him slowly changing genders, and if he stays here too long, oh no! This is a two-parter, complete with a conspiracy that Jones and his new partner Celia are viruses, passed around by a mayor taking bribes from the pneumoniac, and is packed with girly jokes and all the hot pink they could possibly shove into an early 2000s cartoon about gender norms. To be fair, this is still a fun adventure, but man can it be patronizing. I do like the part where they're watching Christine's dream and then Jones appears in it. They don't explain the rules well enough there, so I'm laughing more about the lack of context in this thing. I thought I'd have more to say on this one since it's longer, but that isn't always the case. The action and storytelling is fine here, if more predictable, and there is one positive: the outside stuff is a bit more interesting now. Hector, Christine, and their weird friend have clear personality traits and make their own decisions, but this wasn't as fun as the pilot episode to me. How in Dill's name could Courage the Cowardly Dog do this? Well, by having the Nowhere military launch radioactive carrots at the Bag residence. The first crop grows extremely large, and Muriel's so excited that she eats the whole thing. Eustace doesn't like carrots, so he isn't having any of that, and Courage is understandably worried. The Bags being able to grow food is a terrifyingly rare occurrence. After eating it, Muriel starts getting taller, and after watching a report from the military, we learn that the carrot will make the consumer grow until they explode, and it's apparently alive and chants a mantra.
Grow, expand, explode.
I guess there's more surreal horror in here, but this is much more on the humor side for me, and it only continues down that path as Courage heads into Muriel's stomach and attempts to dislodge the carrot, but his last resort is to eat the carrot himself, which doesn't exactly fix the problem. Muriel shrinks back to normal, but then Courage starts expanding. So he goes over to the military and swallows the commander, who's able to disarm the carrot, but not really, because then Eustace eats it, threatening them to make him rich. So then he starts expanding, and then he just explodes. And the cherry on top of this cuckoo banana sundae, Muriel's cooking meals with the carrots and doesn't mind being huge.
You're right, Courage. I should have put that carrot in a stew.
And that's how it ends. The voyage elements in this are minimal, but it's akin to Blazing Trails and Fantastic Voyage, so I'm including it. I like how this episode plays into the paranoia that your food could alter your body in strange ways, as well as a child's understanding of vegetables making the eater bigger and stronger. It's effective on both those fronts, but the story's way too silly for the situation to be frightening. There's a reason you don't hear much about Military Carrot when the best Courage villains come to mind. Muriel blows up is fine for what it is, but not quite what I'm looking for.
3, 2, 1.
Got a blast!
Come on, it's a boy genius show. Jimmy Neutron would be all over this. And it begins with Jimmy manufacturing his own disease. This didn't age well. There's sick patches that affect the wearer's bloodstream while they wear it, and before long, every kid is wearing them to get out of school. Things look like they'll go great until all their parents try to homeschool them and treat them in their own unique ways. You get some good jokes out of this, but it brings to light the fact that these parents simply aren't taking their kids to the doctors. Also, hi Jigglypuff. Before Jimmy can escape the predicament, the sick patch absorbs into the skin of all the kids, making them permanently sick. So he and one of the friends has to go on a voyage into the other friend and extract mitochondria from one of the viruses. Like a lot of the best Jimmy Neutron episodes, the fun isn't in the scientific jargon or silly scenario, but in how the characters bounce off each other. Sheen has some great bits here, especially in the scene where he has to be a distraction.
Do you do anything besides impressions?
I used to dance in my younger days.
But honestly, Miss Fowl takes the crown. She isn't even a part of the action, but her trying to make do with an empty classroom is fun in a weird way.
How do clouds create rain, Carl? Well, when the clouds get very sad, they cry.
It takes elbow grease to make Miss Fowl laugh, so I appreciate when they do it. Sorry if this is getting redundant, but I like the animation here. Making new sets for 3D shows isn't easy, so the detail they put into Carl's insides is commendable, as is the lighting. When they're in the stomach, the acid reflects this creepy green glow, which sells the tension of the scene. What with all the viruses ganging up on Jimmy, this has got to be one of my favorites so far. The story has a strong foundation and likability, on top of being creative and creepy where it needs to be. The kids have also taken a very important lesson away from this adventure, the power of social distancing.
I think they like you!
So, what's next? I'm worried. I know what this show does to kids, and look at my channel, it's clear I don't have a fully developed mind. But, if I must, the yuck factor starts with the girl's boss, Jerry Lewis, that's his name, getting attacked while working late one night at Whoop. Something goes up his nose, and once again, I like the scene more when there's no context. At school the next day, Sam, Alex, and Clover are in a biology class, and Alex gets really worried about having to dissect a frog, to the point where she tries to excuse herself from future classes.
Sorry, I have a dentist appointment Monday.
Well, are you free on Tuesday?
Chiropractor?
I'm hoping this is relevant to the story. I've just discovered I have a kink for frogs and I don't want it to remain unsatiated. The girls are all called to a new mission by Jerry, and even though he's acting odd, telling them to break some crooks out of prison, they follow his orders. It makes me not care about the breakout because the girls look dumb to me and the crooks are super generic, but they then become super generic henchmen when they get back to Whoop HQ. This is where the girls get so suspicious with Jerry's actions that they break into the Whoop computer lab and learn of a terrible German accent who used to work for him.
How can I control a brain with all this commotion?
Right as they're almost smart enough to put 2 and 2 together, they're caught by Dr. V and he makes the plot go forward. First off, he plans to shrink them. Way to make it easier for them to get inside you. And on the platform he shrinks them, they find a miniature submarine they can use to pilot. And conveniently, it doesn't shrink until they get inside it. Then it shrinks at the same pace as them. I've never been shrunk before, but I'm sure this isn't how it works. Then Dr. V grabs them and yells that they can't get inside him, and they just enter through the mouth while he's yelling. I get the sense that this doctor was an easy threat and the first 2 acts were just padding. Now, the actual voyage part isn't half bad if I'm being honest. The designs of the insides are sleek and detailed, and they address something that's almost never been brought up before. Being inside a body could feel pretty weird, as can be seen with Alex getting sick easily. But the voyage and Fleischer are over pretty quickly after going through the veins and Dr. V acting silly on the outside to get all the younger brothers giggling their pants off. And they're able to save Jerry and apply what they've learnt about the human body to their exam on frog biology. This is one of my snarkiest reviews in a while. Like Quack Pack, I don't hate Totally Spies, but it always feels like the creative decisions are a bit misguided. Sure, the subject matter and the yuck factor isn't memorable for the wrong reasons, but there's still a lot of leg shots and getting tied up with teenage characters. Putting the show's legacy to the side, what did they want us to gain from all this? Maybe a lesson about overcoming things that gross you out, but that's a stretch. Back to familiar territory, Lilo and Stitch the series. Now this episode in particular got quite a bit of representation in promotional material, with Poxy appearing as one of the experiments you can create in the DVD game promoting the show, and then showing up in a trivia game on the Stitch as a Glitch DVD. It seems to be one of the first episodes they made, and it gets one's expectations for the show pretty high. The experiment pod 222 lands in a farm and gets mixed up in wheat that's then ground into sugar. And who should consume that sugar other than Pleakley? It's quickly set up as well that Gantu will hunt down these experiments for his own benefit, and that Nani is less of a thing in this show. After Lilo and Stitch wreck some stuff at the surf hut, she tells her that she's too little to do big, responsible things, and that's a theme that's going to be explored throughout this episode. When we get back home, they find out Pleakley's been infected by an old experiment of Jumba's that was designed to make politicians look unappealing. Just give them Twitter accounts. It's way easier. While learning all this, they follow Pleakley to the hospital, but also run into Gantu and get into some funny slapstick. And then finally, Jumba initiates the plan for Lilo and Stitch to journey through Pleakley in a shrunken dune buggy. I say that as if to say it took them long enough, but in truth, they're pacing themselves well. They go up the other end, and the real fun begins.
Bending over for taking a shot, please.
This, of course, isn't gonna hurt.
Hurt? Nah, not to worry. Will not be hurting a bit.
Going through Pleakley's bloodstream, then the heart, then the stomach, followed by the cranium with tiny brain joke number 12, the kids fight off Poxy, or at least try to, as it's very hard to catch him. He's a real threat, I always trust the Pokédex. Meanwhile, Gantu takes Pleakley and threatens to send him to Hamsterville. It should be clear why I like this one so much. The animation is stellar, and not just with the alien backgrounds. I mean, the character and prop animation can be really smooth sometimes too. I have to give special praise to Pleakley here, he's not taking his disease well. And you wouldn't either, that's another thing most of these episodes don't convey. The episode does have its gross moments, which are kind of mandatory for this subject matter, like Poxy becoming capturable when he gets stuck in earwax, plus the arc of Lilo wanting to do more big person things could have been explored better, and it was later. With the right story, art direction and progression, this is a very successful use of the format. I wish the hospital detour was shorter, but I really like where they went with it later.
Those are for the children.
Time to see how the seminal Adult Swim series Aqua Teen Hunger Force does it, hopefully with wit and nuance. This episode is about Frylock introducing a shrink ray to the house, and Master Shake and Meatwad not taking its usage seriously, Master Shake eventually going mad with power. It's more of the typical size change episode with most of its scenarios, like Shake putting them all in a dollhouse, and Carl using the enlargement setting for his own uses.
No, Carl.
What, you telling me I gotta drag this friggin' thing across the lawn? Call the neighbors. I want them to see this.
The actual voyaging is alluded to at the start when Meatwad eats a computer chip, and Frylock plans to embark on a voyage inside of him to get it. Due to unforeseen circumstances, that doesn't happen. But later on, everyone gets inside one of Master Shake's eyes to get back at him, and at the end, everything reverts back to normal size. Maybe if I watched it drunk at 4 AM, I'd get the desired entertainment value. I hope there are better examples of the show's strong suits. Unremarkable Voyage is right on the money. Hopefully Teen Titans takes itself more serious— oh, who am I kidding? The vaguely titled Crash begins with Beast Boy illegally downloading a video game, but not being able to play it on any of the hardware on the Titan Tower. Nothing but Cyborg's equipment works, but he uses his charging station rather than his computer, so when Cyborg charges up again, he gets a virus that makes him eat a lot. Fun premise, annoying presentation. The chibi anime-style exaggeration works with the comic book aesthetic more in contrast than complement to me. The core of the idea for this weird episode seems like fun, and I really do see the artistic appeal of this show, but the story so far isn't sitting right with me.
We need gravy and plenty of it!
Beast Boy offers to shrink to an amoeba and fight the virus, but the Titans instead opt to call for Gizmo, who doesn't want to help them. We have one character that wants to do it and redeem himself, and another who doesn't want to do it and will sabotage their plans anyway. I can already see things going wrong. And wrong it does, as they humorously wind up in the wrong place. Despite the good chibi stuff, I'm not digging the background design for the inside of Cyborg's circuitry. It looks nice for a scene or two, but it could have maybe changed color or patterns a lot sooner so it doesn't come off as an eyesore. What's even worse is these quote-unquote white blood cells, which are another art style altogether. I'm not trying to hate this, I know this franchise has a cult following, but they're giving me nothing to like here, other than a couple of the things Cyborg spouts on his rampage.
Ooh, that is one big cherry!
The climax at the virus core picks up the slack a bit, but honestly, this pixelated mess looks even more irritating than the blood cells. I can at least appreciate them using Beast Boy's powers in a weird, creative way, but man was this not a good display of the show's strengths. This looks like one of the worst episodes, but even looking at the things it does right, I want to give this show a better chance someday. Now, in late 2004, it's finally time for us to see how the Simpsons take on this plot. They've been around for all of this, and had only ever referenced the original film.
Well, we have had a little trouble finding volunteers.
But now, the season 16 Halloween special ends with In the Belly of the Beast. The Simpsons are at a science expo where Professor Frink is showing off a lifetime pill and shrink ray, but Maggie thinks all the capsules are a ball pit and gets stuck inside while no one's looking. Then Mr. Burns takes the pill and they can somehow hear Maggie's pacifier from inside. It then becomes a very loose parody of the original movie. The same sort of spaceship design, attempt at a colourful environment, and making fun of the movie's fan service.
Why is my swimsuit so revealing?
Marge, that's what turns a mediocre voyage into a fantastic voyage.
He said it! He said it!
Like a lot of Halloween segments from the teen years, the concept is fine and the jokes are solid all around, but it doesn't feel like we have the proper time to get immersed in a tense story. And the characters don't have much of a motivation, like why didn't Frank just join them when he's the most capable with all his stuff? Is there any reason Homer has to be so reckless, other than for added conflict? Only at the end does it start to feel like horror too, with Homer needing to be left behind, only for the shrinkage to wear off and he and Burns become one. Even if this is a throwback to the end of Treehouse of Horror 2, it's still a tonal shift from the rest of the segment, followed by a bigger one to a random musical number that all the characters in the episode take part in. For me, this is saying welcome to season 16, aka Hell. Their take on the voyage is fine, but it could have been a lot stronger, a bit more visually engaging, and be more of a spin on the genre. Only 5 days later, Codename Kids Next Door totally ripped them off. Operation Sprout, or Sickening Produce Removal Operation Ultra Tricky, starts with number 4 eating dinner with his family when his mother tells him something truly horrifying.
Oh, I'm so proud of you, Wallaby. You'll be a big, strong adult in no time if you keep eating your Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts!
Truly horrifying. Thank goodness this show has really good lore, or else stuff like this would put kids off Brussels sprouts. This episode's off to a hilarious start actually, what with Sector V crashing into their house to take number 4 away, and the CAT scan joke is a very fine display of 2x4 technology. Number 1 decides they have to operate from the inside to extract the Brussels sprout, and when they get back to the treehouse, unleash the Itsy Bitsy.
Kids next door, Itsy Bitsy. Incredibly tinified spider invades bodily interior to stop yuckiness.
1, 2, and 5 operate this bionicle nursery rhyme hybrid, while 3 puts it up 4's nasal cavity. They do the routine exploration stuff now. They do jokes about a tiny brain and seeing random objects in the stomach yet again. At this point in the trope's history, it feels like there's less context to the original movie, and all these episodes are send-ups of one another. They still operate on a time limit, but it's been reduced drastically to 6 minutes. Hey, they're kids, and they live next door. You can't expect all their inventions to be perfectly designed. They're just about able to complete the operation, but almost die trying. 1 and 2 are almost drowned in the stomach. 5 has to hold on to the Brussels sprout for dear life, and they expand inside 4's nose to make for a truly disturbing moment. It's not Crumble episode gross, but they're in that ballpark. I just want to say, although a lot of the jokes in these episodes are starting to get cliched, this was still really good for Kids Next Door's take on it. The characters are all on point.
Alright, here's how we'll choose. Eeny, meeny, miny, I ain't going.
It has that really nice balance of horror and humor, and it even manages to fit with one of the series' recurring trends. A lot of number 5's missions have to do with food, so they took it to a new extreme. It's weird that my favorite thing about the episode was Mr. Beetle's story about his day at work that bookends the episode.
I decided to take a visit to the old supply closet, or a SC. So I got to the old SC, or a supply closet for you civilians.
In a show as action-packed as this, it's really funny to hear such a mundane situation. They still end it with some tension, with 4 eating liver and freaking out again, but it's good to see some variety in the types of jokes and the places they'll go. This is one of the better episodes so far. SpongeBob doesn't really strike you as the kind of show that would go for a Fantastic Voyage parody, both in the fact that their direct parodies are sparse, especially early on, and they can already have plankton travel through SpongeBob's body. But they did it anyway, and the result wasn't all that bad. SpongeBob and Patrick are dancing to the sounds of the ocean when SpongeBob dances so hard that he flies into Squidward's house, resulting in a familiar clarinet incident. SpongeBob's able to get most of it out, but the mouthpiece is still jammed in Squidward's throat, and the reed is making his voice all funny. This is one of the weirdest inciting incidents in this marathon currently, but it's in character and is tied back to, so it slides. They go to Sandy to see what they can do, and she sees this as an opportunity to test out her chamber of shrinkage and get the reed out using a submarine.
Why don't you just shrink the reed?
Squidward, always wanting to do it the hard way.
But while stocking up on food for the trip, she makes a grave mistake. She asks SpongeBob to guard the submarine. One Sandy's rocket rerun later, SpongeBob and Patrick are shrunk, and the submarine is ejected through Squidward's big, round nose. And the voyage doesn't go well. They break down in the nasal cavity, then they bounce around in the cranium for a bit before almost dying in the stomach. But Patrick's able to save the day by constructing a plan for them to escape by getting Squidward to drink acidic soda. That is, after he spends most of the episode screwing up the mission at every possible interval. I feel like the writers were subconsciously remembering Dr. Michaels when they were penning Patrick's actions, because this is some of his most destructive behavior yet. Being a massive SpongeBob nerd, it is one of my favorite shows after all, I can't help but view all this through the lens of how the show was evolving at this point. Patrick's written here like how he would have been in seasons 5 to 8, but everything else screams 4. The joke writing, the story progression, the animation, I like all of it. This is one of my favorite looking episodes of the era in fact, but it's held back a bit by a few things. I want to give some praise to the scenes of Sandy and Squidward interacting too. You don't get it all too often, but they play off each other so well.
Now just sign this.
Okay, now what is this?
Oh, just your autograph, for when you're, famous.
There are definitely some criticisms I can give about the more childish jokes and the downer ending, but I like the episode all around. Plus, I can't be mad at an episode that saved a person's life. What did you do today, Grossology? This is a show whose mission statement is to be weird and icky, loosely based on an old book and video game where Charles Martinet teaches you about the digestive system.
Anal sphincter.
This episode starts with a good old-fashioned museum heist where the villain, Lance Boyle, is trying to steal a historic toilet. And I really don't know what my expectations are. This title sequence is awesome, and the flash animation is good for the time, but the tone is not as mature as it could be. I want to know the real threat a guy with a zit head can pose to this world. Brother and sister grossologists, Ty and Abby, then thwart a bombing plan he hatches the next day, but as it turns out, Lance Boyle shrunk himself with nanotechnology and got sprayed into Ty's nose, as he's hatched a new evil plan to mess around in Ty's body in mostly innocent ways. How diabolical! Abby gets in there too with the help of Paul's new shrink ray, and they kind of battle it out and kind of don't. Meanwhile, Ty has hung go on inventing a new battle robot for his nerd group out of revenge. And if I had to take a wild guess, this is a character flaw they only gave him in this episode, just for the sake of giving him something to learn. But then the nerds also act vengeful at the end. It's a joke, but it'll give some viewers mixed messages on whether this sort of competitiveness is a good thing. This episode wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be, it's just mediocre. There's probably better episodes of Grossology, and definitely way worse, but I can infer that this show's a very mixed bag from just the insider.
Nothing like a little irritation to get the sinuses flowing.
The background art and credits look really nice. Basically anything that isn't the characters, they're not even expressive and the movements are stilted. The story also wasn't as rank as it could have been, but it's still nothing that good. These characters seem like they could be interesting, but the subject matter of the show is already a bit of a turn-off. Now, let's see if this episode of Johnny Test was properly whipped into shape. It's always astounded me how such an average cartoon was so popular and so hated in its prime. There's clearly things it did right and wrong, and Johnny Test in black and white shows this off perfectly well. First off, the title is false advertising. Not only does it imply this will parody old-timey film, but they only go in white, not black. Anyway, the story is that secret agents, Mr. Black and White, are told by their general to keep a closer eye on Johnny and his sisters, as they've been getting more destructive. They do this, and bother them, so Susan and Mary concoct a plan to get them out of their hair. It could have used a clarinet reed, but it's still relatively simple and to the point. Johnny and Dookie are put in the submarine to goof off, I guess, because they've installed an autopilot anyway, and after being shrunk, they're put in lemonade that's drunk by Mr. White, and they have to go into his brain and erase his memory of getting the general's order. It's unknown how successful this plan could have ever been, because Black will still have his memory, but whatever. Conflict arises when the autopilot fails, and the submarine is almost eaten by a virus. It gets to the point where everyone actually starts acting like humans. Susan and Mary tell the agents what's going on and apologize, and even help out in getting Johnny to escape. I can just about care about these characters, even though it doesn't feel like anything's happened. This wasn't as bad as I was expecting. There is a defined story and a good reason for the mission, but it gets weird once the mission starts. Also, the agents have a very good reason to monitor the tests, because I'm sure Johnny is responsible for thousands of casualties before the 60-second mark. The animation is also really bothersome. It's so snappy but never has any weight or impact. Where are the whip cracks when you need them? Dookie's the best part because he makes pseudo-gay jokes.
What if we get lost? You can't stop for directions when you're inside a dude, you know. Hello! Mayday! We are stuck inside a dude! Help!
Like the Teen Titans episode, this is probably a poor example of the show, but a better one couldn't make me a bigger fan of it. I've probably just been banned from entering 7 countries for comparing Teen Titans to Johnny Test, but don't blame me, blame Johnny Test for making me say it. Here we are at Robotboy, a show that I could have liked today if it wasn't for about 30 big problems. A kid and his robot kid make some soaps with a virus robot in it, and when it gets to Tommy and Gus, Gus eats the soap. How do they think a viewer is supposed to enjoy or sympathize with this guy after doing something so brain-dead dangerous? This looks like a patented, let's make this kid be as idiotic as possible episode by the time the robot's messing with his brain. No, I'm not diving any deeper into the story or the characters. I deserve a better episode to get into this show. Maybe the rest of Robotboy isn't that bad, but 2007 was a pretty bad year for Fantastic Voyage episodes. Hopefully the decade can turn itself around. Here we go. Phineas and Ferb in their prime. Journey to the Center of Kansas is an episode of season 1 that's honestly a bit flimsy, but has fun with that flimsiness if that makes any sense. Phineas and Ferb can't decide if they're going to make a submarine or a shrink ray, but when Isabella comes over to show her new sash and her dog Pinky eats it, They decide to knock two birds with one stone and make a shrinking submarine. Part of their plan involves hiding in a grilled cheese sandwich, but Pinky runs off to chase a cache, and Candace comes in and eats it before going on a date with Jeremy. It's weird that they make her eat this and cereal even after explicitly stating she has an allergy to dairy. Canon got a lot stronger after this, that needs to be said. So Phineas and Ferb don't know they're in Candace for a while, but still sneak in a musical number by putting on some road trip music. Hemoglobin Highway, a little underrated ditty with a freaky eyeball out of nowhere. I don't know if this is meant to be canon now. They find out eventually with the help of dairy products and interrupt her date with Jeremy in an attempt to get out.
We're getting an image. She's on her date with Jeremy. That means we're on a date with Jeremy.
Again, creepy on so many levels.
But Jeremy has a surprise for Candace. He takes her to his uncle's restaurant and reveals that they have a sandwich named after her, which is nice but not really satisfying. It's not just Candace being unable to bust the boys, this feels like an episode all about things going wrong. The mission, the date, and especially the Perry plot this time. It's basically Doofenshmirtz building in a nature to eliminate people who can't make up their minds, then Perry thwarts him through no trouble, then they both get stuck in some traps Doof set up. I think they hit on something better here, a plot where nothing expected happens. You don't get the right setup or rising action. There's still some action at the end, and a resolution where Doof gets stuck in the submarine and then eaten by Pinky, but it still feels a bit aimless.
Perfect! Now I can pee all over the tri-state area! Oh, what am I doing with my life?
For what it's worth, this is a funny episode, but I think the story revels a bit too much in irony, and was probably not given as much thought because this was treated like an item to check off the list.
I have a tickle in my throat.
Batman the Brave and the Bold did this too. I'm not an avid fan of superheroes, so I don't have a frame of reference for whether or not this is a good cartoon, but I certainly like their take on it here. Journey to the Center of the Bat begins with this teaser of two stretchy dudes arguing while thwarting the boss baby, which has nothing to do with the main story but gave me a good idea of what this show would be like. Old school superhero action with a dash of corny humor. It's just missing a fun-loving Aquaman voiced by John DiMaggio.
Aquaman here. What's new, old friend?
How did they know? The setup isn't all too complicated, it just involved a giant snot monster called Chemo infecting Batman with some sort of disease, so the Atom and Aquaman shrink down into him and fight it. I'm not one to critique Batman's characterization, but I wonder how in line it is that he disobeys the Atom's order to rest up. I'm serious, I don't have much wrong with this. He is a hero that needs to fight this Chemo monster. He's putting the safety of the world before himself. I just wish he would have watched the Magic School Bus before going on this adventure. The Atom and Aquaman travel through his body against backgrounds of varying surrealism, and face off against silver robots who we learn later were constructed by this guy called Brain, thrilling villain. For what it is, this show has a good sense of humor, but I wish they leaned more into the comedy aspects. Like, my favorite thing about this episode is when Aquaman calls for help from fish, but can only get a white blood cell that acts like a seahorse.
I stand corrected.
Even better, when it dies, the Atom loses his composure and revels in the fight he's gotten himself in. But with this art style and tone, it's strange seeing a joke character being plot relevant. There's still something here about the Atom and Aquaman being an unlikely duo, with their brain and brawn being at odds at points in the episode, so it's not like they turned the episode into a farce. They may not have an ending, but they certainly have a heart. And that closes out the 2000s. We're in the 2010s now, a massive decade in terms of animated content, but far less Fantastic Voyage episodes to be found. I guess the original movie isn't as nostalgic for this generation of animation staff, but some still kept the tradition alive. Case in point, the first one I'm watching is from a 2000s cartoon. The Fairly OddParents took another swing at personifying body parts with He Poofs, He Scores in Season 7, an episode that starts with Timmy and his friends on a soccer team called The Victims that isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's a rare sight in Season 7 seeing Timmy's friends, and even then they never talk here. They're putting all their marbles on Filthy to be the most hilarious thing ever. Admittedly, he isn't too bad here, but he's still such a spotlight hog.
Dad, what are you doing on the ceiling?
Well, I'm certainly not sneaking off to the game without you. No second chances!
One day, while Timmy's eating cereal, Poof transforms into part of it and gets eaten, and takes an elevator to the brain. I don't ever recall learning that food goes directly to the brain in science class, but it's not like Tiny Timmy was completely scientifically accurate, so whatever. Poof starts playing around in Timmy's cranium, making his brain more active and his body more capable in soccer. Things start to go hunky-dory for the victims, but then they realize they need a hurdle. Timmy sends Tootie, the only other kid who speaks this episode, on a wild goose chase across the world to throw Cosmo and Wanda off. And I decide that Tootie being able to travel across the whole world on bike is too far-fetched. Again, remember when Dimsdale was dim? The finale game against Dinkelberg's duck team is where things start falling apart, as Cosmo and Wanda come back and chase Poof in Timmy's head and deactivate all his skills. We also get to watch Filthy tear himself apart, that's fun, but after losing his skills and dignity, Timmy decides to score for the other goal so it can be bounced back into theirs, which wins the game. It should be clear that the story's flawed and Filthy far from Father of the Year material, but there's enough good things in this episode to hold it together. The montage of Timmy winning in particular is pretty fun. With latter-day Fairly OddParents, you can do a whole lot worse. Heading forward 3 years to regular show's take on it. Despite how popular this show was, I hardly saw it, but if this is an average episode, I bet it's a lot of fun. It begins with Mordecai, Rigby, Pops and Thomas going to the dairy and getting a slushie, proceeding to take turns chugging it and getting pictures taken of their brain freezes. All innocent fun so far, but when Thomas's face is lame, he's egged on to do better and gets the coolest slushie the dairy has. I'm no diehard fan, but I'm already sucked into this regular world with its regular problems, like Thomas getting a brain freeze so intense that he's on the verge of death. This is told to them by Dr. Henry, a member of Pops' species, so I'd be trusting him with my life. And the doctor has a plan to shrink Mordecai Rigby down and inject them into Thomas's brain to burn out the brain freeze from the inside. One thing I like about this show's depiction of shrinkage is that they acknowledge it could be painful.
Oh, I forgot to tell you, shrinking is extremely painful. What?
When they're injected, that's when things get truly regular. The inside of Thomas's brain is a snowy wasteland, and they soon meet up with Thomas's consciousness, which is still kicking.
I'm Thomas's consciousness. Of course I'm in my own head.
I guess that makes sense.
Damn, imagine being in this state and feeling it for minutes on end. Before going any further, they find a tiny Asian guy in a slushy cup heading for the core of the brain, and they do battle in a race with the Asian guy falling to his doom on an accidental cavern. Rest in peace, you're currently my favorite villain in this show. The slushy cup doesn't give up though, but right before he's able to freeze the core, Mordecai is able to spark a stick of dynamite with an arrow. I can see why Twilight loves this guy so much. This sort of bravery and quick thinking is very commendable from a dude bro sort of character. There's a little time left, so Mordecai and Rigby have to race back to a transporter while they're growing back to normal size, and unlike their predecessors, are able to escape just in time, with Thomas being cured successfully, so everything's back to normal. And the photograph of Thomas's brain freeze is widely renowned. I'll say I definitely like this episode. It goes on a strange adventure and keeps giving you incentive to follow along, and it's all started by a goat man drinking a slushie. I can't go much further in depth because I'd feel like a fake fan, and I want to get a better perspective on this show if I want to give it any more credit. Not saying 2013 Cartoon Network was endless smash hits. I've never been the biggest Uncle Grandpa guy, and Brain Game doesn't make a very compelling case to go back. Uncle G and the gang are on a drive in the van, and Pizza Steve is gloating over how good he is at Doom, only he isn't.
Did you beat the game already, Pizza Steve?
This stupid game? It only took like 5 minutes.
The kid they're seeing today just so happens to be one who isn't so good at video games. So there's only one valid solution. Get Uncle Grandpa to shrink them and go into the kid's cranium and improve his motor skills from within. We end up in a zoo.
Dicks out for Harambe.
Honestly, it's not the worst thing in the world. Uncle G is trying to be helpful after all, and Pizza Steve learns not to stretch the truth regarding his gaming skills. But like I said, Uncle Grandpa isn't my cup of tea. Or book in the case of the ending segment here. There's better episodes with more coherent stories, but I can still appreciate this sort of commitment to madness. As for Rick and Morty, maybe I just don't have a high enough IQ, but I've never been able to get what all the hype is about. Anatomy Park is only the 3rd episode of the series, so I wasn't expecting the world from it, and luckily enough, I found some stuff to enjoy. It's Christmas, and Jerry's trying to get the Smith household to enjoy a technology-free holiday. But when his parents come over, he quickly gets irritated at a man they've invited over who spews life advice, and later reveals he's dating Jerry's mother.
I watch them. Sometimes from a chair, sometimes from a closet. Almost always dressed as Superman.
For turning a conventional sitcom scenario into a story about polyamory starring Dana Carvey, it could be weirder, and I honestly wish it was. The most interesting thing that happens is Summer's boyfriend comes around to yell at her, and that goes nowhere. The main plot of the story is where all the actually creative and hardcore action takes place. Rick's brought a homeless person dressed as Santa home named Ruben, and while the rest of the family thinks it's a charitable gesture, Morty soon let in on Ruben's inner struggles. Rick sends him into his body where Anatomy Park is located, a theme park that unfortunately cannot compete with Kidneyland. The establishment is hanging by a thread, and as Ruben dies, all the diseases cooped up in the park as attractions begin to attack the remaining staff and Morty. The fact that they're inside a body is rather important to the jokes, action set pieces, and monsters they face. It's not held together by my preferred type of comedy, but they're going all in, which is good to see. Things get weirder, however, as Morty falls in love with Annie, one of the park's employees, and Rick hatches an obscenely far-fetched plan to go into outer space and enlarge Ruben to the size of the United States so they can escape. Now all that's left to do is count down to the obligatory Wang joke, and also see the plot resolve itself or whatever. Certainly a weird, gross episode, and if that's your thing, you can't go wrong with half the episode. Honestly, the highlight to me is how protective Rick is over his Pirates of the Pancreas ride he thought up.
So we asked ourselves internally, we asked ourselves over here, okay, what does a pancreas do? And the answer was, does it make pirates? No, it makes insulin, you know? So we're starting with a new...
To be fair, you need a high IQ to get the reference. But as it is, Anatomy Park was just okay to me. The Christmas plot is lame, and the park plot is a bit gross and cliche for my liking, but it's not catastrophically awful for an underground Adult Swim adventure show. Moving on to Mickey Mouse, one of the definitive cartoon stars. How does he do it in the new show? Pretty well. He, Goofy, and Donald go to a science convention with Ludwig von Drake, where a shrink ray is on display. Mickey's mind quickly fills with all the possibilities and discoveries that could be made with it, just as Donald accidentally activates the ray while getting some water, and Mickey and Goofy land in the water and go down the hatch. The title's starting to make a lot more sense. Narratively, this is a hard throwback to the good old days of Quack Pack. Donald Duck is our host again after 18 years. It's clearly a throwback to the 30s cartoons visually, but there's so much more life and texture to everything. My favorite part is when they mess with Donald's vocal cords. I've never seen a joke like that in a Mickey Mouse cartoon before this show came along. It's awesome to see. But when they get to Donald's peanut-sized brain, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Donald notices them and throws a fit. They land in his stomach as he tries attacking them by eating and drinking, but they manage to escape through the other end as they grow back to normal size. It ends with Donald giving birth to them. I'm just saying, if they wanted to do this plot, it was Daisy's turn. It could have been less weird, and weirder at the same time. Down the Hatch is really good, even though it's much shorter than all these other examples of the genre. The average length of a Mickey Mouse cartoon is around 5 minutes. Still, these are some of the best 5 minutes of the marathon so far. It's miles better than The Germinator, if that's any sort of metric. And speaking of second-time hosts, Teen Titans Go couldn't resist a Fantastic Voyage episode, at least not Robin. After Cyborg gets a different kind of virus, he obsesses over going on a body adventure.
Body adventure!
He even gets a shrink ray from a yard sale, which doesn't make him small enough to fit inside Cyborg, but small enough for the first half of this to be a regular tiny episode. There's some good jokes here, also some bad ones. I don't get the hate for this show, but it isn't impressing me all that much either. Sorry to be a fence-sitter, as much as I'm hoping the episode gets better. I'm also hoping it could be worse so I have something to talk about. Eventually, Robin modifies the shrink ray, just as Cyborg's illness gets worse, and zaps him and the rest of the Titans to microscopic size, depending on the shot. Sometimes they're the size of mites, other times they're more ant-sized. This hasn't been a continuity error exclusive to this episode, but it's a faster jump here. Anyway, Silky aids them in getting to the body faster after a 10-month trek through the carpet, and it turns out the inside of a body isn't as glamorous as Robin was hoping.
This is most unpleasant.
Like Totally Spies, I appreciate that they bring this to mind and get jokes out of it, but I'm also understanding why it isn't a very common addition to these episodes. This art is gross enough by itself, you don't need to hammer it in too hard. It doesn't help that the ending's very underwhelming. They get too grossed out to fight the germ, who isn't putting up much resistance, and then they get out and try to call a doctor. That's where the episode ends. Raven poofed up her normal-sized phone for some reason, and of course she's too small to be heard. The dedication to Cyborg's body is a nice thought though. It took me a second to process that it was a joke, so I really thought for a brief point in my life that this episode was dedicated to a late crew member or friend. It's all kind of lowbrow and unoriginal, but I don't want to get infuriated. It's Teen Titans Go, it really doesn't deserve that much scorn.
This is...
I don't get why such a middling cartoon got so much attention, and Penn Zero Part-Time Hero got nothing. This is yet another show I've never seen before, and it wasn't very popular in its day, but reading the premise of a trio of kids that zap themselves into other dimensions to save the day, I was cautiously excited. It helps that the animation looks really good too, detailed, smooth. I really need to put it on my bucket list just for its concept and appearance. The trio's comic relief slacker, Boone, makes his presence in the story known right away, distracting Penn from his schoolwork and standing in his place on this here Transmash. He seems to be a handful, but I'm holding out hope that they can make this work. In this newfangled dimension of the week, Boone and Sashi have entered a micro-submarine traveling through a patient's body to cure a deadly disease. That patient? Penn, thanks to Boone's buffoonery. Still, I like how they reveal this twist, showing off how similar the submarine's cockpit and the science lab are. But Sashi gets knocked out so the story can be all about Boone saving the day. Hooray! I hope he's able to start being a compelling character now. Well, yes. He is able to buckle down and study by singing like Jack Black and deciding to go through the heart to shoot the medicine. These villains the trio have to face off also appear in Penn's body, but after hearing about how stupid Boone's plan to save the day is, they just leave the episode. I understand the joke, but this is my first episode, so I was expecting more from them. Sashi wakes up just as Boone is about to seemingly endanger the mission, but it turns out he knows to shoot the medicine into the brain as he's taking a shortcut through the circulatory system. Boone completes the mission successfully, as does the episode. It did its job in making Boone a good enough hero to carry the story. There are things about this episode I'm really impressed by, and some things I wish were developed better, like what was up with Sashi's memory glasses and that boy she has feelings for. That story's implementation into this one felt a bit clunky.
Excuse me, are you following me?
I do not love you.
But I hope I get a better impression of it whenever I get to watch this show for a review. Now here's a show I've heard almost nothing about despite being on the air for 13 years. Archer did this for its 2-part finale of their 6th season, and this gives me real bad episode of a good show vibes. The intelligence service gets an assignment mirroring the original Fantastic Voyage movie. Russian scientist working on a miniaturization technology has a brain clot, and it's followed by jokes. And then we get a briefing on it, interspersed with more jokes and I think character moments, but all I see is jokes.
There's so many submarine movies.
And in any of them, was anyone on board any submarine weightless?
Yeah, plus that time we were all on a submarine and were not weightless.
Oh, right. But this time we're gonna be tiny.
Not bad ones, but they feel like distractions. Michael Gray's performance as TV's Michael Gray is already annoying. I got that much out of this briefing scene. I can't tell you how confident the writers were in doing this parody, because although they made this a 2-parter, it's a very padded one. Their submarine doesn't even shrink until the 17-minute mark, and a botched injection makes the basis for Part 1's cliffhanger. I guess that's an original take, having to travel all the way up the body to the brain from the foot. But Part 2 is filled with character moments that would either be more impactful or more shallow if I had a better idea of these characters. Archer himself is given the most focus, but he's a total dumbass. Did he get dumber over time? Did he get smarter again after this? That's the sort of trouble with jumping into some of these shows blind. Fantastic Voyage struggles to be entertaining in its own right. The animation is fine, obviously the character animation is off doing its thing, but the CGI backgrounds from the inside aren't that bad here. It's weird how they don't look surreal, given this was more of a direct send-up of the source material, but I guess capturing the inside of a human body is hard enough for animators to do. The intelligence service fails their mission.
Begin demilitarization.
And get blacklisted by the CIA. And I really do wish I could care more about these folks, because this leaves Season 7 with a few decent creative opportunities. If most Season 6 episodes were like this, I can't blame them for wanting to shake the series up by the end. Speaking of shows that got shaken up, we're back to the Chloe OddParents. They did the Fantastic Voyage trope a third time in their 10th and final season with the episode One Flew Over the Crocker's Nest. It's donut day at school, and Mr. Crocker's having a mental evaluation to verify that he's sane enough to be a teacher. These two things don't correlate, but I guess the writers had thought up so many jokes about specifically donuts and mental evaluation that they wanted to incorporate into the show. For some reason, Cosmo's a donut and sneezes in Crocker's face despite having the fairy flu. I'll give them a bit of credit for this, considering the fairy flu was seen all the way back in the Oh Yeah cartoon days, but if only they could emulate the interesting writing too. With Crocker making bizarre wishes at the worst possible time for fairykind and himself, Chloe wishes for her, Timmy, Cosmo, and Wanda to be in a microscopic submarine and destroy the fairy flu viruses from within. The rules have never said anything about not being allowed to wish for vaccines, so talk about an inefficient wish. And comparing this directly to Tiny Timmy, it's so obvious which is the better episode. The colors are more basic, the jokes louder and more forced, and while the picture is clearer, it doesn't feel like it's ever being put to good use. The predictable running gags today include Timmy having to remind people how to talk to him,
Pass the cochlear nerve and turn at the esophageal canal. Speaks the average. Dude, hang a right!
although the context would land better if he said, like a normal 10-year-old, and Cosmo eating soup. It even affects the plot at one point. This episode has nothing really going for it, sorry to say. They've done Fantastic Voyages before, they've done Crocker granting wishes by accident before. The only thing original One Flew Over the Crocker's Nest has to its name is the Cosmo viruses, and that's not the only thing you'd want on your resume. I'll at least say that the plot concludes satisfactorily, with Principal Waxaplast getting sent away instead of Crocker. At least it's an ending. That's the bar the Fairly OddParents had to clear by this time. It isn't good, but it's still one of the more interesting Season 10 episodes for a few reasons. Now here's something spicy. The Magic School Bus rides again. Another notorious reboot of an older cartoon with a much cuter art style that was criticized by many of the original fans. Time is a flat circle, and so is my brain at this point. At least they got George Arthur Bloom from the original series back to write this one, so my hopes aren't that low. Carlos brings his new pet rat, Ratney, to school, surprising the other children. Intent to make it the class pet, because I guess Liz has been promoted to dean, he's encouraged to speak to the principal about it, but ends up getting sick pretty quickly. Time for the other kids and the new teacher, Fiona Frizzle, to go inside him. Times have changed, but there are still things that remind me this is the same franchise from the 90s. How they integrate facts into the story, and how that story flows to tell more facts. That hasn't changed, and neither has the writing really. Fiona doesn't command anywhere near the same attention as her sister though, and some of the dialogue is paced oddly.
Well done, Ralphie! You hit the regular selinator.
The latter can probably be chalked up to the animation, and there's no hiding it. This looks really cheap, especially for 2017. It doesn't look like the budgets were managed appropriately. This looks like the thing they spent the least time and money on. Especially the backgrounds, there's no character to them. But what there is character in is these kids' suits turning into selenators to confuse the allergens. The story's pretty basic kids show stuff, all things considered. It takes them 50 years to come to the conclusion that Ratney is what's causing Carlos to sneeze. Then he lets her go, but then they realize it was the pollen in some flowers Ratney was playing in, not her. So Carlos gets to keep her. It's alright, but I was darn happy to hear some good old-fashioned Carlos zingers again.
That's flamtastic.
Okay, they're not that clever, but at least he dabs in this episode. The next episode has a bar to clear. Ralphie strikes a nerve, has our dear old pal Janet come back to taunt the other kids that their football team's cheerleaders are so much worse than hers. So Ralphie comes up with the idea to get a giant cheerleading robot. Fiona likes it and takes them to a robotics expert. It really is amazing sometimes just how much these kids get. They think of the nuttiest possible way to cheerlead, and the Frizz is like, sure, let's do that. This is starting to remind me of another old show, 5 kids operating a giant robot. This has to be intentional. When you know it, they end up coordinating poorly, so Fiona takes them into Jodie's head to learn how a human brain sends out commands for movements. And I'm already far more impressed by the background art here. The color scheme is cool, the neurons are detailed well, and the framing is dynamic, especially when they're learning about the jobs of synapses. Fiona seems to be a good teacher, but she should probably stop talking about her extended family, who seems way more interesting than herself.
You know, like my cousin Nasal Hazel used to say, take no rest, take no pause, we're on our way to Jody's schnoz.
And another thing, why have both of the Reboot Voyage episodes so far involved getting into the noses? I smell a rat. We get the good old-fashioned false conclusion too. Just because Ralphie knows to send information to the other parts doesn't mean the problem's solved. It's still tiring stuff being the center of a nervous system. So when the giant robot falls again, he falls asleep. Sure, that's just code for he was originally unconscious, but it was changed in a rewrite for being too violent. And the class goes inside his stomach to learn that the human brain's powerful enough to send information unconsciously. After this quick, almost pointless detour into another character, Ralphie relinquishes operation of the robot onto Keisha, and that works. They successfully cheerlead, and the episode quickly ends and cuts to the Valerie Frizzle segment. The story in this episode's a little goofy, but at least there's a fine lesson about teamwork through all the brain stuff. But there aren't any Carlos puns, so it's basically worthless. Deliver us, Janet's mystery gene. Today, Carlos and Janet have to read a book to the preschoolers, but Janet's picked her autobiography. Obviously, disaster is imminent, so Fiona's completely on board with the student's suggestion to go inside Janet and alter her DNA to make her nicer. I see being a humble human being failed after about 10 years.
A regular old blood-pumping heart, so she does have one.
But I think this is a little extreme. They go to her heart first to check if it exists, then head down to the cellular realm to find some facts about DNA and genes.
So the replicator is going to change the DNA strand in every cell at the same time.
That's genius! Carlos!
I see we're on a return to form! I can't tell you if season 2 is better just from this one episode, but it seems they've gotten certain things like backgrounds and movement sorted out now. It's nothing amazing, especially for the penultimate episode, but I can cut it a bit more slack still. While trying to change up Janet's traits, they quickly turn her into something inhuman, learning two things: that DNA is a part of every living organism, and not to play God. I'm okay with them coming to their senses halfway through the story, but there's still a wacky plot twist to deal with. They haven't fixed her voice, so more DNA shuffling ensues.
Hello? Are you ready, children?
It leads to the best joke of the episode, though. Look at these kids, they're overjoyed that the Janet they know has ceased to exist. She eventually turns back, however, and is furious when Carlos tells her what he and the class were doing to her. Kind of a reasonable reaction. But by the end of the episode, it became about rewriting a gene to make her less anxious, which feels like a last-minute change to make the adventure more okay, but we learn anyway that emotions and personalities aren't necessarily the responsibility of DNA. There's a fine adventure in here, just don't think too hard about the ethics. Those were all the Voyage episodes in the reboot, as far as I'm aware. They're not as bad as I was expecting, and there's some decent facts in here, but man, I hope production went smoothly because this is how a whole generation saw this genre. Fantastic Voyages fell out of style hard as the 2010s went on, but come the 2020s, 2021 specifically, we've seen a small revival. And the forerunner to this is Pony Life. It isn't surprising My Little Pony took 37 years and 5 shows to make one of these. The generally icky subject matter wouldn't mesh well with their colourful, cutesy image. Pony Life didn't have much time to leave an impact, either in series runtime or episode runtime, but they managed to squeeze one of these into the show with Journey to the Center of the Cord. Of course, it has to be him. After figuring out that things are disappearing due to chaos magic, Detective Rarity spends a whole day trying to find the culprit. Enraged that he's messing with Equestria's magic, the main 6 head to his house to ask him what he's up to, and don't succeed. There's only one way they can get inside his head, and that's to literally get inside his head. Why Fluttershy needs a shrinking potion here when she can change size at will is a riddle that can't be solved, but they head it to his ear and seemingly into a whole dimension ruled by chaos. And chaos looks like a 3-headed bunny that spews password jokes.
Password?
Fluttershy, but the E is a 3.
No, we changed it last week. We had to add an exclamation point.
And a big maze. Props where they're due. I like how they're journeying through a maze to stop him, just like the old times. Fluttershy is able to find a book with all the wishes he's cast, some of which were theirs.
A million mice, mousetraps, more wishes, fewer wishes, the ability to breathe ice instead of fire, an apple orchard the size of a planet, a TV show starring me as every character, an Olympic-sized pool and an indoor gym.
This is part of a season-long story arc about wishes, so maybe don't watch Season 2's episode standalone. That's one way to ease the issue of every episode feeling 3 seconds long, but I still don't think their ideas have enough time to flourish. Good idea, but I've seen it done like 55 times before. And that means I've only got 2 more to go, both from franchises that have already done it. Starting with the 2021 Johnny Test reboot. Knowing Johnny inside and out is different from the last Test episode I watched, in that it feels like it comes from an actual TV show. Slick animation, designs, the sense of humor's more hit than miss, but it's still recognizably Jonathan Examination, and today's the last day of school. He and Dukey are ready to chillax, but Johnny's parents remind him of a big history test he has to do. Unable to study because convenient character trait, he gets Susan and Mary to help him remember the information. They do this in a completely unique and original way. Dukey tags along to make some jokes about popsicles, but right from the word go, the plan seems to have been a big mistake. They keep bouncing around Johnny's brain and making him act weird, first by removing his fear impulse, making him more reckless than usual, then by activating the supervillain gland we all have.
Don't cheer that! He's evil!
All while fighting a head cold as an extra complication. I wouldn't say the backgrounds are the best I've seen for this video. They aren't bad by any means, but there's not much time for them to sink in due to all the time they spend on this wide shot of the submarine's windshield and the head cold. The thing they want you to remember the most is clearly Johnny D-Test, one of Johnny's more canon villainous alter egos. The joke is that he detests tests and wants to destroy all tests, including his own parents. It's the sort of wordplay designed to get a kick out of the tweens, and that's the show's target audience, so no complaints on my end. This is what a good episode of Johnny Test looks like, not lighting the world on fire, but it knows its audience and refrains from talking down to it. And so, we have one more Fantastic Voyage cartoon to cover, made so recently that it was aired and probably entirely produced after I began writing this video in June 2021. It seems this genre is never going to go away fully, and neither is Family Guy. Ahead of the 20th season, Fox released a 3.5-minute public service announcement to encourage vaccinations against COVID-19. I knew somehow it would have come around to this. The story is that Peter isn't sure if he wants to get it, so Stewie and Brian use Stewie's time travel pad to enter Peter's body so Stewie can lecture the audience about the vaccines. That's pretty much it. Fairly accurate information about the effects and benefits of vaccination, with a couple Family Guy jokes sprinkled throughout.
It could mutate into a variant that the vaccines might not protect against. And then we're right back where we started. Gal Gadot singing Imagine. We cannot let that happen.
The funniest bits to me are that the virus looks like Meg, and the end where Peter finally gets the vaccine.
Is that a freaking Bart Simpson Band-Aid?
The only thing that really bothers me? Why is Family Guy doing this? They have a long history of ridiculing the notion that TV shows have to prioritize morals.
Like for instance, if you're watching a TV show and you decide to take your values from that, you're an idiot.
And have delivered some blatant anti-morals that shouldn't be taken literally in 1,000 years. It's just strange that they would put these characters in a very important and informative PSA when they come from a franchise that tends to trip over whenever it takes itself seriously. If it did more good than harm to worldwide vaccination rates, then I can't complain too hard about it, but listen to a professional, not funny moment baby. And with that, I think I've covered every Fantastic Voyage episode I can. There's a couple that I missed, I'm sure, but I hope I've taken a look at a very generous sample of what this whole genre has to offer. It's unbelievable how one little 60s sci-fi movie could have this much of an impact over an entirely different industry. You could make an entire show out of all 58 of these examples. It's insane how many directions this idea went off in. Plenty of them felt easy enough to write, but there are some legitimate works of art in here that use the human body in some seriously creative ways. So, what better way to rank all these episodes than with a tier list? So, I've got this up in Photoshop. I would have it on Tier Maker by now because it is a really good site for these sorts of tier lists, but Tier Maker is currently making me a tier maker, so I'm just going to jump right into it here. You should probably know how this goes. Family Guy, I'm probably going to put in okay, as in the vaccination PSA, because it's not bad. It gets its job done. It's just sort of ethically weird why you'd use Family Guy for this when it's not the most trustworthy with morals and stuff. I'm gonna go in reverse order, by the way. Knowing Johnny inside and out, I thought this was good. I thought that this was funny and creative and better than I was expecting, so that's a plus. Journey to the Center of the Cord, like a lot of Pony Life, it is deep in meh territory. Like, there are interesting ideas that just don't have the time to develop. Janet's Mystery Gene, probably gonna go okay, because the voyage is fun, but yeah, ethically, it's kind of a shirt-collar tug. Moving on to Ralphie Strikes a Nerve, another okay one. Like, there are a few weird plot elements, but it's nothing bad. Carlos Gets the Sneezes. This one had a particularly messy story, so I'm probably going to put it one below. I can't imagine there are many bad Magic School Bus episodes, so yeah. We're floating around meh to good, but now we're at One Flew Over the Crocker's Nest. Well, this is bad. I'm just going to say it up front. Nothing really super memorable about this one, especially compared to the other Fairly OddParents Fantastic Voyage episodes. Heading to Totally in Your Body, this one was pretty good. I was surprised. I haven't heard much about Pen Zero Part-Time Hero, but this was a good episode. I was pretty impressed by it. There's a couple things in it that I didn't quite get, but I would really like to go around to this someday. Drastic Voyage from Archer. This was just boring, bad. Nothing really funny happens. Like, there's a couple good jokes, but it just ends up being anticlimactic. Body Adventure from Teen Titans Go. I was fighting with myself over this. Like, is it bad? Is it okay? I really couldn't decide, so I'm gonna put it in a really low meh spot. Mickey Mouse Down the Hatch. This is S tier. This is absolutely gold. I loved this one. It's really funny, really energetic, really charming. You really should see the Paul Rudish Mickey Mouse shorts if you haven't, because this is a legitimately great show. I don't really cover super modern shows, but if I did, this would be all over my channel. Anatomy Park from Rick and Morty. It's got Pirates of the Pancreas, but also a lot of gross out that doesn't really equate to much and a really boring subplot. I'm probably gonna put it in meh. Sorry to say. Same with Brain Game from Uncle Grandpa. This was sort of the first time I'd seen Uncle Grandpa in a while, and it's not a hard show to get, but it can be a hard show to like really get yourself invested in, if that makes any sense. Cool Cubed from Regular Show. I picked this because it's a very funny screen cap out of context, but this is great. I really enjoyed Cool Cubed. I like how it's a different spin on the Fantastic Voyage genre. It's usually dark and red, but this takes place in a snowy wasteland for some reason. I find that pretty original. He Poofs, He Scores from the Fairly OddParents. It's okay. Like a couple season 7 episodes. It's not too bad, but at the same time, you're better off with the earlier seasons. The Inside Job from SpongeBob, I didn't count because it doesn't involve enough size alteration, but you can include that in Plankton if you want. Journey to the Center of the Bat from The Brave and the Bold. This is pretty good too. I like the banter between the Atom and Aquaman, but the stuff with Batman fighting the Brain and the lack of an ending did hold it back for me, but nevertheless, I thought this show was pretty good. Journey to the Center of Candace. This one is in the okay tier because there's so much better Phineas and Ferb episodes out there, and this just felt like a check off the list. Robotboy, Journey to the Center of Gus. I'm putting this in the no camp. Sorry. No. I need a better reintroduction to this show because, yeah, nothing about this one appealed to me. You have a character eat soap at the start of your episode and you have totally lost me. Johnny Test in Black and White. This one is a doozy. I really have no idea. Like, it's going in very low meh, like the Teen Titans Go episode. They're birds of a feather, these two shows, and I think they should be treated equally. The Insider from Grossology, I was pretty fair on this one in my, video portion of this, but it's going in bad because I just don't remember anything about it. It's a very forgettable episode from a brief, forgettable show, honestly. Fantastic Voyage, this is pretty good. It's very season 4 in a lot of ways, but I do like season 4 more than I don't, so, hey, balances out. Operation Sprout, this is a very good one. I'm putting this in great, because it's very tense, it's very dramatic, but it's also very funny and got good character moments. And that's what Kids Next Door was like at the peak of its popularity. In the Belly of the Boss from The Simpsons, this is also okay. You couldn't really go wrong with that many Treehouse of Horror episodes from this era. There weren't that many truly awful ones, but this is just sort of middle of the road for that sort of series. Crash from Teen Titans, yeah, another very forgettable one. I'm putting it in bad. I know, don't kill me for putting it below TTG, but I mean, with TTG, I kind of expect mediocrity, but from Teen Titans, I just haven't got enough of a reason to like this episode when there's probably so much better episodes out there that I could have watched, and this just doesn't have enough creativity or good character moments. The best it gets is with the things Cyborg says, and even those are complete non sequiturs that belong more in TTG. Unremarkable Voyage, I did say it was unremarkable, but it is meh, because like Uncle Grandpa, it's a show that I get, but have to find the right headspace before I can say I'm a fan of it, and that time hasn't come yet. Poxy from Lilo and Stitch, this is a good one. I like this one. The stuff in the hospital isn't that bad, but once you get past that, it's a fun time with some really gorgeous animation. This is the first HD one, notably, even though I couldn't show it in the video. An out-of-body experience from Ozzy and Drix. The jokes about osmosis becoming a girl or girly thing don't really land for me, but I do appreciate the creativity and whatever developments it brought from the first season. Pest Control from Teenage Robot, I sort of put in the same category of, it could count if you're generous, but I'm not a generous fella. The Yuck Factor from Totally Spies. Totally Spies. I will say, there are some really good scenes. There's some very good backgrounds inside Jerry Lewis. I can't get over the fact that their boss's name is Jerry Lewis, but the story blows. This is bad. And it has nothing to do with the notorious aspects of the show, I think. Journey to the Center of Cal. So many journeys to the centers of people from Jimmy Neutron. This is great. This is one of the classic season 1 episodes. Before they got too serious and continuity rich, and it was just a goofy little spin-off of this goofy little movie. This is the sort of episode that you really wanted to see, and yeah, they got the job done. The Death Camp of Tolerance from South Park. Again, not only is there not enough size shifting, but I could not get away with describing this one on YouTube. Muriel Blows Up from Courage the Cowardly Dog. It's okay, not the best Courage episode, but there's some pretty stiff competition. The pilot for Ozzy and Drix, Home with Hector, it does retcon the movie in a pretty insulting way, but other than that, it's a pretty cool adventure, pretty nice villain. Does a good enough job otherwise of introducing a new world for Osmosis Jones and Drix. Jack and the Farting Dragon from Samurai Jack, didn't have the fondest memories of this one, and also it's just not sizey enough. And Mission Impossible from Family Guy, the earlier Fantastic Voyage episode done by them, this is going in the good tier because the voyaging is mostly in the final act, but when you get there, it is really fun, and there's a good reason that Bertram stuck around in the franchise for as long as he did. Nano ZIM from Invader ZIM. This is definitely going in S tier. I applaud the ambition of this episode and how good it looks, and the atmosphere and the CGI. Everything about it is really awesome, if nothing else. I know I said in the video that I haven't, given Invader ZIM the time of day, but if this is the average episode, I'm sure it'll be a treat if I ever get around to it. Tiny Timmy, it's pretty good. Yeah, and it's that same zone as the SpongeBob episode because it's fun, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so yeah, make of that what you will. Parasite's Lost from Futurama, this is probably going to be my favorite episode by the end of this, and it's just more proof of how good Futurama was at its peak in the later Fox years. Fantastic Voyage from the Angry Beavers, I'd probably put this a step above the SpongeBob and Fairly OddParents examples because it has the same tone as those, but I just think it's a lot funnier and has less caveats. Plankton from SpongeBob, it's kind of like Inside Job, so I didn't really include it. Incredible Shrinking Weasel from I Am Weasel. Wasn't impressed by it, but also wasn't super bothered by it. Meh tier. Fishing for Trouble from Cat Dog. Don't really want to count that. Quail Man Takes the Blame bad. Pretty bad. Microcops from Oh Yeah Cartoons. I think that a second and third short would have made it a complete package. Like, you could have gotten a saga, like with Mina and the Count. But for the stuff that John Ng was able to do here, I think that he really succeeded in making something interesting and creative and fun to look at and fun to watch and fun to see play out all the way through. Brainwashed from Pinky and the Brain, it was a great time. I really enjoyed it, but it's not S tier because it's kind of false advertising. There isn't much voyaging. There's a bunch of different sci-fi tropes being played with, so I decided not to put it in S tier, but it was a really fun one otherwise. Journey to the Center of the Cow, not enough shrinkage here, I think. Internal Affairs from Are Real Monsters. This one's going in meh because I like a lot of these. I need a better understanding of the show, and this didn't impress me that much, honestly. Magic School Bus Makes Us Stink is going in okay. It's got some okay ideas, but it just weirds me out, man. Magic School Bus Goes Cellular. This was my least favorite Magic School Bus episode of the classic era, and I'm probably gonna put it in meh tier. Like, it's on about the same level as the weaker reboot episode, personally. Like, if you've got super fond memories of this show, not trying to say that the reboot is as good or better, because it isn't most of the time. Fantastic Voyage from Dexter's Lab. This one is I'm fighting between good and great on it. I think that because of how well Gendy directs, I'm gonna put it in great because there's something truly cinematic about this episode that shouldn't go overlooked. The Magic School Bus works out. I'm probably gonna call this good. It's kind of ironic that this is my first good Magic School Bus episode, but I really did dig the science facts. I found Ralphie to be pretty funny in it for some reason, and Miss Frizzle to be pretty funny in it, but there's something really trollish about the writing in this episode that's hard to describe, but that's the reason why I'm putting it there. Beetle Romania, I'm probably going to put this in the okay tier because, I mean, I do like the ideas, but it is an endless loop, and that's kind of unsatisfying. The Germinator, I'm going to push in the meh territory because don't really find Quack Pack to be all that fun, but there are a few good jokes in here that shouldn't go overlooked. Blazing Entrails from Ren and Stimpy. This one was okay. Like, I didn't really love it or hate it. I thought that Brainchild was an interesting enough new character, but there are things about it that are a bit loosey-goosey and not that fun. Magic School Bus Inside Ralphie, that's going in the okay tier because they made his mother a bit too dense, like for a doctor. But otherwise, It's an early episode and probably had more life and energy than a lot of the later ones. Not saying that it got worse over time, but more that they had more fresh ideas around here. The Magic School Bus for Lunch, this is pretty classic. Like, they made a whole game out of it. So I'm probably going to put it in good, as I will the Inside Story from Rugrats. Inside Job, a lot of inside jobs. Inside Job from Captain Planet, also in the good tier. A lot of good. I'm not trying to be lazy, but these are all about the same quality for me. Here we go, Germ Wars. This is no. Your video game characters are not more important than your family, and I'm sure Fact Xanadu is a good game, just don't advertise it like that. Inside Plucky Duck from Tiny Toons. It would be great, but like Brainwashed, it's only a couple minutes. So yeah, good, but not really that high up there. Inner Dave from the Alvin and the Chipmunks cartoon. That's also meh. Not my favorite, but there's probably better examples of the show. Journey to the Center of My Sister, just for that name, no. Also, I forgot to do the Mighty Mouse and Muppet Babies episodes about it, but I figured I'd had enough of the 1980s by the time I got to Alvin and the Chipmunks, so yeah. The Invasion of Colonel K, I'm probably going to put that in good as well. I do really like Danger Mouse, but yeah, it doesn't make too much sense, and the reboot's probably better and probably could make a better episode. And The Mind of the Master, no. Please no. I don't like these characters, and I don't like this animation, and it makes zero sense, but there we go. That's my whole tier list ranked. I'm gonna very quickly edit it so that it looks a bit cleaner, because good, okay, and meh are pre-packed. And there we go. Here's the whole tier list done by me that you can do yourself by now, probably. But man, this was hard for one person to do. If only I could clone myself so I could do it more. That gives me an idea. How about next time I do one of these, it's about clone episodes. Goodbye for now, and keep on voyaging.
You just gave me